Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I was traveling home from a weekend conference in a city a few hours away. To save money, I took a late night train. It was nearly empty, so I settled into the designated quiet car, hoping to get some rest before my stop. The quiet car lived up to its name. No one else seemed to be in it, and the dim lighting only added to the hushed atmosphere. I set my bag on the seat beside me and pulled out my phone to watch something, but the eerie silence made me feel strangely exposed, so I put in my earbuds and pretended to be asleep instead. About halfway through the journey, I felt the car shift slightly the way it does when the train comes to a stop. Furious, I cracked open one eye. We were at a small, dimly lit station. Nobody boarded, and the platform was empty except for one person. A woman stood near the edge, facing away from the train, perfectly still. She didn't have any luggage or appeared to be waiting for anyone. Her hair was long and unkempt, and her coat looked oversized and weathered. I figured she was waiting for another train and tried to dismiss the unease creeping up my spine. The train started moving again, and as we pulled away from the station, I glanced back out the window. The woman hadn't moved an inch. It was almost an hour later when I noticed something was off. I had fallen asleep briefly but woke up feeling cold. When I opened my eyes, the train car was darker than before, and then I saw her. The woman from the platform was sitting 2 rows ahead of me. I froze. There was no sound, no indication that anyone else had entered the car. My heart started pounding as I stared at the back of her head. She was hunched forward slightly, her hair covering most of her face, and she didn't seem to have anything with her. No bag, no phone, nothing. I couldn't understand how she had gotten on the train. We hadn't stopped again since that station. I debated what to do. Should I move to another car? Should I alert someone? But something in me said not to move, not to make a sound. I stayed still, hoping she wouldn't notice me. Then, as if she could feel my gaze, she slowly turned her head. Her face was pale, almost unnaturally so, and her eyes were hollow, like she hadn't slept in days. But the worst part was her expression. She wasn't angry or upset. She was smiling, a slow, deliberate smile that felt like it was meant just for me. I was paralyzed. She didn't say anything, didn't move any closer. She just stared at me, smiling, for what felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, she stood up and walked toward the door at the end of the car. But she didn't leave. She stood there, facing the door, completely still, as though she were waiting for something. I couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing my bag, I bolted to the next car. Thankfully, there were a few other passengers scattered around. I sat as close to them as possible, my hands shaking as I clutched my things. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting her to follow me, but she never came into the car. When the train finally reached my stop, I practically ran off and didn't look back. I told a few friends about what happened, and most of them think she was just some weirdo trying to scare me. But I can't shake the feeling that there was something wrong about her. I've taken that train a few times since, but I always avoid the quiet car. A few weeks passed after that encounter, and I managed to push the memory to the back of my mind. It became one of those stories you tell at parties, brushing it off as creepy but harmless. But deep down, I couldn't forget the way she smiled at me like she knew something I didn't. One evening, I was scrolling through social media when I came across a local news post. It was about an abandoned train station scheduled to be demolished. The article included photos of the station. My stomach dropped when I recognized it. It was the same station where I had first seen the woman. The article mentioned that the station had been closed for nearly a decade due to safety concerns. That didn't make sense. My train had stopped there, hadn't it? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, so I started digging. Late that night, I stumbled across a forum dedicated to urban legends and strange occurrences in my area. I hesitated but finally posted a description of the woman in the station, asking if anyone had experienced something similar. Most of the replies were jokes or ghost stories, but one comment stood out. Do not go back to that station. There's a reason they shut it down. The story goes, a woman was hit by a train there years ago. Some say she was running from someone, others say she jumped. Either way, she didn't survive. Since then, people have claimed to see her on the platform or even on the trains that pass through. But here's the thing, if she notices you, don't let her follow you home. She's been known to attach herself to people who pay her too much attention. I stared at the comment for a long time. It felt ridiculous. This couldn't be real. It was just an urban legend, right? But then things started happening. A few nights later, I was sitting in my living room when I heard a faint tapping at my window. I live on the 2nd floor, so it didn't make sense. I tried to convince myself it was just a tree branch, even though there's no tree near that window. The next morning, I found small smudges on the glass. They looked like fingerprints. Over the following following days, I kept catching glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but one night, as I was heading to bed, I saw it clearly, a figure standing at the end of the hallway. My breath caught in my throat. It was her. She didn't move, didn't make a sound. She just stood there, smiling. I don't know how I managed to move, but I slammed my bedroom door shut and locked it. I didn't sleep at night. By morning, she was gone, but the sense of dread lingered. I started avoiding my apartment as much as possible, staying out late and crashing at friends' places. But no matter where I went, I felt like I was being watched. And then the dreams started, dreams of being on the train again, of her sitting closer and closer to me, her smile never wavering. I don't know what she wants or why she chose me. I've tried everything to get rid of her, cleansing rituals, therapy, even moving to a new apartment. But every so often, I still feel her presence. Sometimes it's the faint sound of tapping at the window. Other times, it's a fleeting shadow in the corner of my vision. I wish I could say the story ends there, but it doesn't. After I moved, things seemed to quiet down for a while. I started sleeping better, convincing myself that maybe she had finally let go of me. Maybe I had done something right, burning sage, moving cities, whatever. I even started using public transport again, though I avoided late night trains and stayed far from the quiet car. Then one evening, I was at a work function that ran later than expected. By the time I left, it was too late to catch a bus, and my car was in the shop. My coworkers had all left hours earlier, so I had no choice but to take a train. The platform was eerily empty when I arrived. I reminded myself that it was just late, and people were home where they should be. I checked the schedule, only one train was left for the night. When it finally arrived, I hesitated. The train looked older than usual, like it hadn't been in service for years. But it was my only option. I stepped on, half expecting the lights to flicker dramatically like in a horror movie. Instead, it was just still. The car I entered was nearly empty except for a man reading a newspaper at the far end. He didn't look up as I passed him. I chose a seat in the middle, close to the doors, just in case. For the first 20 minutes, nothing happened. I told myself I was being paranoid. The woman wasn't here. She couldn't be. I was overreacting. But then, I noticed something. The man with the newspaper was gone. I hadn't seen him leave, hadn't heard any doors. It was just me now. I tried to calm myself, but every nerve in my body screamed that something was wrong. And then I heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from behind me. I froze. My body refused to turn around, but I didn't need to. I already knew what I would see. Slowly, the tapping got louder, closer. My breath hitched as I felt a cold draft sweep past me like someone had brushed by. The tapping stopped. My instincts screamed at me to move, to run, but I couldn't. And then, in the reflection of the window across from me, I saw her. She was standing in the aisle, her head tilted slightly, that same unsettling smile stretched across her face. But this time, she spoke. "You shouldn't have left me." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My reflection in the window showed my wide, terrified eyes locked with hers. "I only wanted to come with you," she said. Her smile widened unnaturally, stretching in a way that wasn't human. The lights in the car flickered, and when they came back on, she was gone. But the cold lingered, and the air felt heavy, oppressive. The train pulled into my stop moments later, and I bolted out as fast as I could. I didn't look back. I didn't care if anyone saw me running like a lunatic. I just needed to get away. Since then, the tapping has returned. At home, in my car, even in broad daylight. It's faint, almost imperceptible, but it's there. And sometimes, when I look in mirrors or windows, I catch glimpses of her. Just a shadow or the edge of that smile. I don't know what she is or what she wants, but she's not going to let me go. Not really. I've never shared it before, but it's stuck with me ever since. I used to live in a small, rural town surrounded by miles of dense forest, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and not much happens. There was an old, rickety bridge just outside of town. It was part of a narrow, seldom used road that led to an abandoned mill. The bridge itself was one lane, made of rotting wood and rusted metal. Locals called it the Devil's Bridge because of its creepy appearance and a few old ghost stories. One summer evening, my friend Kayla and I decided to take a drive. We weren't doing anything in particular, just killing time and enjoying the warm night. Kayla suggested we go check out the bridge. It wasn't far, and we figured it'd be fun to scare ourselves a little. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I didn't want to be the one to chicken out. We reached the bridge just as the sun was setting, casting an eerie orange glow over everything. The woods were unusually quiet, like the birds and insects had decided this place wasn't worth their noise. Kayla parked the car at the edge of the bridge, and we got out. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Kayla, always the braver one, walked to the center of the bridge and peered down at the dark, slow-moving river below. "This is so creepy," she said, her voice echoing slightly. "Look kind of cool, right?" I forced a laugh and stayed closer to the car. That's when I noticed something odd. On the far side of the bridge, just where the trees began to crowd the road, there was a figure standing in the shadows. I couldn't make out any details, but it was tall and motionless like a statue. "Kayla," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're not alone." She turned to look and immediately froze. The figure took a single step forward and my stomach dropped. It wasn't the movement itself that scared me, it was the way they moved. Jerky, like they weren't used to walking, and their proportions were too long in some places, too thin in others. It didn't look right. "We need to go," Kayla said, her bravado gone. She started backing toward the car and I followed. That's when we heard it. A low, guttural growl. It came from the direction of the figure, but it didn't sound human. It didn't sound animal either. It was deep, guttural, and seemed to reverberate through the air. The figure took another step, then another, moving faster now but still unnaturally. Kayla screamed, and we bolted for the car. I jumped into the passenger seat while she fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped them. The engine roared to life, and she threw the car into reverse, tires screeching as we sped backward down the road. As we put distance between us and the bridge, I dared to look back. The figure was standing in the middle of the bridge now, perfectly still, watching us leave. Its head tilted slightly, almost curiously. Then, just as we turned a corner and lost sight of the bridge, it raised a long, thin arm and waved. We didn't stop until we were back in town, parked under the bright lights of the gas station. Neither of us said anything for a long time. Finally, Kayla broke the silence. "We're not telling anyone about this," she said, "ever." And we didn't. At least, not until now. We never went back to the bridge, and as far as I know, no one else has seen anything unusual there. But every now and then, I dream about that figure, about the way it moved, about that wave. For weeks after that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home. My room, which had always been my safe space, felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. At night, I'd hear faint creaks in the floorboards or the sound of soft rustling, like someone brushing against the walls. I told myself it was just my imagination, the after effects of the bridge playing tricks on me. Kayla and I didn't talk about what happened, not directly, but we both changed. She stopped wanting to drive anywhere after dark, and I started sleeping with my bedroom light on. Even though we'd promised not to tell anyone, I caught her glancing nervously at the woods whenever we drove by, as if she expected that thing to step out at any moment. One night, a couple of months after the bridge incident, I woke up suddenly. It was that kind of waking where you're not sure what disturbed you, but your heart is racing. My room was bathed in the soft glow of my lamp, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. Then I noticed the shadow. It was on my ceiling, stretched and distorted, but unmistakable. Long arms, thin legs, a too tall figure. The shadow didn't move, but it was there, looming over me like it had seeped in through the cracks in my walls. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I just stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. The shadow began to shift, not like a person walking, but like smoke curling in the air. It crawled down the wall, elongating as it reached the corner of my room, where it stopped. Then, in one impossibly smooth motion, it stretched toward my bed. I finally found my voice and screamed, bolting upright and scrambling backward until I hit the wall. My parents burst into my room seconds later, their faces pale and alarmed. "What's wrong?" my mom demanded, flipping on the overhead light. The shadow was gone. The room was completely normal. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out right. My parents chalked it up to a bad dream, and maybe that's what it was. But I didn't sleep the rest of the night. After that, things escalated. Kayla started having nightmares too. She said she'd wake up and feel like something was standing at the foot of her bed, watching her. One night, she called me at 3 a.m., sobbing. She swore she saw the figure from the bridge standing outside her window, its face pressed against the glass. By the time she worked up the courage to look again, it was gone. We decided to talk to someone about it. There was an old man in town, Mr. Grayson, who was known for being a bit of a local historian. He loved telling stories about the area's folklore and legends. When we mentioned the bridge, his expression darkened. "You went to the Devil's Bridge?" he asked, his voice low. We nodded. He shook his head, muttering something under his breath. "People always think it's just a name, a silly story," he said. "But that bridge, it's a boundary, a doorway, if you will. Things linger there, things that don't belong in our world. You must have caught its attention." I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer, just gave us a stern warning: "Don't go back, and don't acknowledge it if it comes around. Whatever you do, don't invite it in." We left feeling more uneasy than ever. We tried to move on, to ignore the lingering fear. Kayla eventually left town for college, and I stayed behind, but we drifted apart. Life went on, and the strange occurrences became less frequent. By the following year, they had stopped altogether. I still don't know what we encountered that night on the bridge. Part of me wants to believe it was just our imagination, a shared hallucination fueled by the spooky setting. But deep down, I know better. Sometimes, late at night, I'll catch myself staring out my window, searching the darkness for a tall, shadowy figure. A few years passed, and life settled into a more ordinary rhythm. I moved out of my hometown for a new job in a city several hours away. The nightmares had stopped, and I hadn't thought about the bridge in a long time. Kayla and I had lost touch completely, and while a part of me missed her, another part was relieved. Talking to her always felt like reopening an old wound. But then, about 6 months ago, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, an actual letter. The envelope was plain and unmarked, with no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with just a few words, written in shaky, uneven handwriting. "It's not over. Be careful. Kayla." My stomach churned as I reread the message over and over. It didn't make sense. I hadn't heard from her in years, and she'd never been the type to send cryptic notes. I debated whether to call her, but the number I had for her was old, and I didn't even know if it would still work. I tried to push it out of my mind. Maybe it was some kind of joke, or maybe she'd gotten into something strange and was reaching out to me for reasons that had nothing to do with the bridge. Still, it unsettled me. That night, I had the worst dream I'd had in years. I was back on the bridge, alone this time. The air was heavy and thick, just like before, and the woods were eerily silent. I couldn't see the far side of the bridge, just an endless black void. As I stood there, I heard the growl again, low, guttural, vibrating to the air around me. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Something emerged from the darkness ahead. It wasn't the figure we'd seen that night, it was worse. Its limbs were impossibly long, its face a blank, featureless expanse of pale skin. It crawled toward me, its movements jerky and wrong, and I knew, somehow I just knew, that if it reached me, I wouldn't wake up. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. For the first time in years, I slept with all the lights on. The letter and the dream left me rattled, but I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. A bad prank, a bad memory. Then the sighting started. It began with little things. A shadow flickering at the edge of my vision. A faint tapping at my window late at night, even though I lived on the 3rd floor. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment, but when I checked, no one was there. One night, I was walking home from a late shift at work when I felt it. That oppressive, heavy feeling in the air. My steps slowed, and my breath caught in my throat. I didn't want to turn around, but I couldn't help myself. It was there, standing in the pool of light cast by a street lamp about 20 feet behind me. Its arms hung at unnatural angles, its head tilted, and it was just watching me. My body froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. Then it started moving, slowly at first, but with each step, its pace quickened. It didn't walk, it glided, its body jerking unnaturally as it closed the distance between us. I don't know how I did it, but I broke free of the paralysis and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was inside my apartment, every door locked and every curtain drawn. Since that night, I've lived in constant fear. It's always there, lurking at the edges of my life, waiting for the right moment. I've tried to research, to find answers, but nothing explains what we saw on that bridge, or why it's still haunting me. I don't know if Kayla is still alive. I don't know what it wants, but I know one thing for certain. For context, I worked late shifts at a downtown law office. My job required me to stay well past midnight sometimes, and because parking was cheaper at night, I used a nearby garage that operated 24/7. The garage was one of those multi-story ones with flickery fluorescent lights and a faint smell of damp concrete. On most nights, it was eerily quiet, save for the occasional hum of a distant car or the echo of my own footsteps. One night, I wrapped up work around 1 a.m. and headed to the garage. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor where my car was parked. As I stepped out, I noticed a small office I had never really paid attention to before. It was tucked into a corner near the stairwell, its frosted glass windows glowing dimly from inside. The words security office were stenciled on the door. I remember thinking it was odd. I had used this garage for over a year and had never seen anyone go in or out of that office. I shrugged it off, figuring I just hadn't noticed before. As I approached my car, I heard the door to the office creak open behind me. I turned around to see a man step out. He looked to be in his late 40s, with a receding hairline and a uniform that seemed slightly too small for him. He smiled, but something about it felt off. His smile was wide, but his eyes didn't match. "Late night?" he asked, his voice echoing slightly in the empty garage. I nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Yeah, work ran long." He took a step closer, and I instinctively stepped back, keeping my car between us. "You know, it's not very safe here at night," he continued, his tone casual, but the words carried a strange weight. "You should stop by the office next time. We've got cameras. You'd be safer if someone knew knew where you were. Alarm bells started going off in my head. I glanced around. The garage was empty. No other cars, no other people. Just me and this man. I'll keep that in mind, I said quickly, fumbling for my keys. He didn't move, just stood there, watching me, that strange smile still plastered on his face. As I got into my car, I locked the doors immediately and started the engine. He didn't try to stop me, but as I backed out, I saw him still standing there, now staring at me through the windshield. I drove home as fast as I could, trying to shake off the unease. When I got home, I decided to call the parking garage management the next morning to ask about the security guard. Here's where it gets weird. The next day, I explained the situation to the garage management. They told me they didn't have a security office on the 3rd floor. In fact, they didn't even employ security guards after 6 p.m. I felt my blood really cold. I asked if they had cameras and could check the footage. They promised to look into it and get back to me. A few days later, they called me back. They had reviewed the footage. There was no record of a man leaving the so-called security office that night. In fact, they said that room had been empty for years, used only for storage. I was shaken. The idea that I had interacted with someone or something that didn't exist on the security footage was almost too much to process. But there was no denying what I had experienced. I decided to avoid that parking garage entirely. I told my boss I wouldn't be working late unless the company covered a rideshare or I could park somewhere closer. For weeks, I avoided downtown after dark. I tried to put the incident behind me, but it kept nagging at me. Who was the man, and how could he just not be there on the footage? Then, something happened that made it even worse. One night, I was at home, flipping through channels in an attempt to unwind, when my phone buzzed. It was an email from the parking garage management. The subject line read, "Incident update." Curious but apprehensive, I opened it. The message was brief. "We've conducted a deeper review of past footage following your report. While we couldn't find any evidence of the man you described on the night in question, we did find something unusual. He appears on older recordings, always around midnight, always near the 3rd floor office. Strangely, his appearances stopped roughly 2 years ago, just after a reported assault in that area of the garage. The case remains unsolved. We've forwarded our findings to the police." I dropped my phone, my heart racing. The details clicked together in the worst possible way. Was this man tied to the assault? Could he have been the perpetrator, or worse, the victim? I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever or whoever I had encountered wasn't entirely alive. The next day, a detective called to ask a few follow-up questions. He confirmed that the case involved a woman who was attacked late at night and managed to escape after a struggle. She described her assailant as a man matching the one I had seen. They'd never caught him. The detective asked if I could come in to look at a photo lineup, just in case I could help. Nervous but willing to assist, I agreed. When I got to the station, they showed me a few photos. One of them sent a chill straight through me. It was him, the man from the garage. The detective nodded grimly. "That's who we thought," he said. "But here's the thing. He was killed in a car accident 2 years ago, just a week after the attack. We were never able to link him conclusively to the assault before he died. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The man I saw and spoke to shouldn't have been there. I don't use parking garages anymore. In fact, I avoid most places that feel deserted or isolated, especially at night. Sometimes, I think about that security office and wonder what might have happened if I'd followed his suggestion to stop by next time." After the lineup, I spent the next few days in a haze. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep, and certainly couldn't bring myself to explain to anyone what had happened. Every time I tried to articulate the sequence of events, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. A week later, I received another email from the garage management. This time, it wasn't an update about the footage or their investigation, it was a formal notification. The garage was permanently closing. The message cited structural issues as the reason, but the timing was too coincidental for me to believe that was the whole truth. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I found myself googling the garage and the assault case again. Digging deeper than I had before, I found an obscure forum thread from a local true crime group discussing the case. One comment stood out. There were rumors the guy didn't act alone. People think there was a lookout or accomplice. Police could never prove it. My stomach turned. What if the man in the parking garage wasn't just lingering as some restless spirit? What if he was looking for his missing partner or a replacement? I tried to push the thought out of my mind, but it clung to me like a shadow. The idea that he might not have been alone in the first place made the whole situation feel even more sinister. A few months passed. The garage was fenced off and slated for demolition. I had almost convinced myself that whatever I experienced was an isolated, unexplainable event. Then, something happened that shattered that fragile peace. One night, I was walking to my car in a different parking lot, well lit and busy, the kind of place that made me feel safer. As I approached my car, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from an unknown number. The message was simple: "You should be more careful at night." I froze. My first instinct was to think it was a prank. Maybe someone had overheard me telling the story to a coworker or friend. But then another message came through, remember the cameras. Someone should know where you are. My breath hitched. That was exactly what the man from the garage had said to me. I looked around the lot, my heart pounding. There were people around, but no one seemed out of place. Just normal folks going about their business. I quickly got into my car, locked the doors, and drove straight home. When I got there, I called the number back, but it didn't ring, it just went straight to a disconnected message. I forwarded the text to the detective I'd spoken to before and begged him to trace the number. A few days later, he called me back with news that left me shaken to my core. The number had been tied to a prepaid phone purchased 2 years ago. It had never been used until now, and the purchase, it was made in a convenience store a block away from the parking garage on the night of the assault. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened. I've moved to a new city, changed jobs, and taken every precaution to make sure I'm never in a situation where I feel unsafe again. But sometimes, late at night, I can't help but feel watched, like there's someone or something out there that hasn't forgotten me. For context, I live alone in a small apartment. It's nothing fancy, but it's cozy and I've always felt safe there. At least, until this happened, I had been working late on a project and decided to take a quick break around midnight. My apartment is open plan, and from my desk in the corner of the living room, I can see most of the place: the kitchenette, the couch, the TV, and the hallway that leads to the bedroom and bathroom. There's a large antique mirror hanging in the hallway. I picked it up at a flea market years ago because I liked its ornate frame. It's one of the few decorative things I own, and it's never given me any bad vibes. Until that night, as I got up from my desk to grab a snack, something in the mirror caught my eye. It was subtle, just a shift in the shadows, but enough to make me stop and look. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. The hallway was dim, and the glow from my desk lamp created weird reflections. But as I stood there staring, I saw it again. A figure, not behind me in the room, in the mirror. It was faint, like it was standing just beyond the surface, in a space I couldn't see. The outline of a person, tall, with broad shoulders, and something strange about the face. It was blurred, like looking through frosted glass. My heart started pounding as I turned to check the hallway behind me. Nothing, just the empty hallway, silent and still. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. I laughed nervously, chalking it up to sleep deprivation. I made myself a cup of tea and tried to forget about it, but as the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time I glanced at the mirror, I felt a heavy sense of unease, like I was being watched. Around 2 a.m., I decided to call it a night. I turned off my computer, brushed my teeth, and headed to bed. But as I walked past the mirror, I felt compelled to look. I didn't want to, but it was like an invisible force was pulling my eyes toward it. The figure was back. This time, it was clearer. I could make out the shape of its head and shoulders, and its face. Its face was still blurred, but now it had eyes. Too dark, sunken voids that seemed to pierce through me. It didn't move, but I swear it was looking right at me. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. I didn't dare look away, afraid that if I did, it would come through. Slowly, I backed into my bedroom and closed the door. I locked it, something I'd never done before, and sat on the bed, trying to calm down. I barely slept that night. Every creak and groan of the apartment felt like footsteps. I kept expecting to see the figure standing at the foot of my bed or hear it scratching at the door, but nothing happened. The next morning, I decided the mirror had to go. I took it down, wrapped it in an old blanket, and drove it to a donation center. I didn't tell them why I was getting rid of it, I just wanted it out of my life. Since then, I haven't seen the figure again, but every now and then, when I catch my reflection in a window or a mirror, I feel that same unease, like something is still watching me, just out of sight. A few weeks after I got rid of the mirror, I started to feel more at ease. My apartment felt like mine again, and I stopped jumping at every little noise. I'd even convinced myself that the whole experience had been a combination of stress and an overactive imagination. But just as I was beginning to put it behind me, something happened that shattered my fragile sense of normalcy. One night, I came home from work and noticed something strange. My apartment door was unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it before leaving, but the deadbolt was undone. My stomach dropped. I stood there for a moment, debating whether I should call the police, but curiosity or stupidity got the better of me. I pushed the door open slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. The apartment was silent. Nothing looked out of place. I checked every room, every closet, under the bed, nothing. No sign of forced entry, no missing belongings. Just that unlocked door. I convinced myself it must have been a mistake on my part. Maybe I was in a rush that morning and forgot to lock it. I double checked it before bed, locking both the deadbolt and the chain. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of fade tapping. It was soft, rhythmic, and coming from the direction of the hallway. At first, I thought it might be something outside, a tree branch against the window, maybe, but then I remembered there were no trees near my apartment. The tapping was coming from inside. I froze, straining to hear. It stopped for a moment, and then I heard a slow, deliberate creak. My heart dropped. It sounded like someone stepping on the old wooden floorboards in the hallway. I wanted to scream, but fear kept me rooted in in place. Instead, I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. Slowly, I swung my legs over the bed and crept toward the door. The tapping had stopped, but the air felt heavy, oppressive, like the whole apartment was holding its breath. I opened the door and shined the light down the hallway. It was empty, but as the beam passed over the spot where the mirror used to hang, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The faint outline, just for a second, like a smudge on the wall. It was the same shape as the figure I'd seen in the mirror. And then, as I stared at it, the smudge faded, disappearing completely. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as the sun came up, I called a locksmith and had all the locks changed. I'd even asked the landlord if I could break my lease early, but they wouldn't budge. I was stuck. For the next few weeks, nothing happened. No tapping, no strange figures, no unlocked doors. I almost convinced myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. One evening, as I was scrolling through my phone, I got a notification from my building's security app. It's one of those systems where you can see footage from the cameras in the lobby and hallways. The notification said there had been unusual activity near my unit. Curious, I opened the app and clicked on the video. The footage was from the hallway outside my apartment. Time-stamped at 2:58 a.m. It was grainy and a little blurry, but I could clearly see my door. And then I saw it. The figure. It wasn't standing in the hallway. It was reflected in the glass of a framed photo on the opposite wall. Tall, broad shoulders, and those same hollow eyes. It stood there for a moment, motionless, before slowly fading out of view. I don't know what it is or what it wants, but I've made arrangements to move out at the end of the month. Until then, I've covered every reflective surface in my apartment with sheets and avoid looking at anything that might show my reflection. Moving out couldn't come soon enough. Every day, I felt the oppressive weight of its presence, even though I never saw it directly again. I'd hear the faint tapping late at night, feel the inexplicable chill in the air, or catch fleeting shadows where there shouldn't be any. But the worst part wasn't the sounds or the sensations, it was the feeling of being watched. Constantly, I packed my things during the day, always with music or a podcast playing to keep my mind distracted. I didn't even want to think about what might happen in the silence. Every box I taped up felt like a step closer to freedom. The last night before my move, I couldn't sleep. My bed was already dismantled, and I was lying on a makeshift pile of blankets, staring at the ceiling. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of my phone on the floor beside me. I'd set up a white noise app to drown out any strange sounds, but somehow, it wasn't enough. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. Not the tappy this time, something worse. Whispering. At first, I thought it was coming from the white noise app, but as I strained to listen, I realized it wasn't. The sound was faint but unmistakable, low, guttural murmurs coming from the direction of the hallway. It was like several voices speaking at once, overlapping in a discordant hum. I froze. My breathing became shallow, and my heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to convince myself it was my imagination, but the voices grew louder, more distinct. Words started to form, though I couldn't understand that yet. It sounded like a language I didn't recognize, ancient and wrong. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the hallway outside my room. Nothing was there. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. And then I felt it, a presence, standing just behind me. I didn't look. I couldn't. I bolted out of the apartment, leaving everything behind. I spent the rest of the night in my car, parked in a well-lit lot, with the doors locked and the engine running. The next morning, I went back with a friend to collect my things. I didn't tell them what happened. I just said I needed to get out fast. We loaded everything into a truck, and I left that apartment for good. It's been months now, and I'm in a new place. Bright, open, and with no antique mirrors or reflective surfaces in sight. For a while, I thought I was free, but last week, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. I was walking past a department store window late at night, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure standing just behind me in the reflection. Tall, with broad shoulders and hollow, sunken eyes. When I turned around, there was nothing there. I don't know if it followed me or if it ever truly left. All I know is that I avoid mirrors, windows, and anything else that might reflect back more than just me, because deep down, I know it's still out there, waiting. About a year ago, I started a new job in an old, towery office building downtown. The place had that vintage charm, wood-paneled walls, creaky elevators, and frosted glass doors for every suite. My office was on the 5th floor, and I worked late most nights because I was new and wanted to make a good impression. One evening, I was in the elevator heading down to the lobby after an especially late night. I was alone, and as the elevator descended, it jolted slightly and stopped on the 7th floor. The doors opened, revealing a dimly lit hallway. I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone had pressed press the button but decided to take the stairs. Still, something about the 7th floor gave me the creeps. The lights flickered faintly, and I noticed every door along the hallway was shut tight, except one. At the far end, a single door stood slightly ajar. I felt a shiver but figured it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. I reached for the closed door button when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping sound like fingernails on wood. It came from the direction of that open door. Against my better judgment, I stepped out of the elevator. The hallway was eerily silent except for the faint tapping. I approached the door cautiously, peering into the crack. Inside, the room was almost entirely dark, save for a flickering fluorescent light in the corner. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just a few old filing cabinets and scattered papers. But then my eyes adjusted, and I noticed something where someone crouched in the far corner. The figure didn't move, but I could hear the tapping more clearly now. It was coming from the figure's direction. They were facing the wall, their head tilted at an unnatural angle, and their arms. They were too long, almost reaching the floor. My breath caught in my throat as the tapping suddenly stopped, and the figure turned its head toward me. Its face, if you could call it that, was blank. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin. And yet, I felt it staring directly at me. I stumbled back into the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran back to the elevator, slamming the button repeatedly until the doors mercifully closed. As the elevator descended, I half expected it to stop again, but it didn't. When I reached the lobby, I bolted out of the building without looking back. The next day, I couldn't shake what I'd seen. I decided to ask one of the longtime employees about the 7th floor. He gave me a puzzled look and said, "There's no 7th floor. That floor has been sealed off for years." A few weeks passed, and I tried to convince myself that what I saw was just a result of sleep deprivation and stress. But the memory of that figure in the corner haunted me. I started asking subtle questions around the office, nothing too direct, just casual mentions of the building's history. Most people shrugged and said they didn't know much about it. One janitor, an older man named Ray, told me the building was nearly a century old and had been everything from a law office to a newspaper headquarters. One day, I finally worked up the nerve to ask about the 7th floor directly. Ray paused mid-sweep of the hallway, his expression shifting to something unreadable. "You don't want to go poking around up there," he said after a long silence. "Why not?" I pressed, trying to sound nonchalant. "They sealed it off for a reason," he said quietly. "People used to work up there. A lot of people, until they didn't." That cryptic answer only made me more curious. I spent my lunch breaks digging through old newspaper archives online. It took some time, but I eventually found an article about a fire on the 7th floor. It happened decades ago, back when the building was used as an accounting firm. The article claimed a disgruntled employee had started the fire in the middle of the workday, trapping several people in the office. 7 were killed, and the floor was damaged so badly that it was never fully repaired. Instead, it was walled off, leaving only the structural frame intact. The story gave me chills, but it didn't explain what I'd seen, or why the elevator had stopped there that night. I tried to let it go, but my curiosity kept gnawing at me. Against my better judgment, I decided to go back. This time, I planned to record everything on my phone. I waited until late one evening when the building was mostly empty. Armed with a flashlight and shaky confidence, I took the elevator to the 6th floor and walked up the stairs to the 7th. A metal gate barred the way, but it wasn't locked. I pushed it open with a screech that echoed down the dark hallway. The air was stale and cold, and the lights flickered just as I remembered. I walked slowly, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the carpet. As I approached the same door that had been ajar before, I noticed it was now closed. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. The door creaked open to reveal the same room, its flickering light casting eerie shadows. The filing cabinets were still there, as were the scattered papers, but the corner where the figure had been crouching was empty. I stepped inside, my flashlight sweeping the room, and then I heard the tapping, soft, deliberate, coming from behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beamed darting wildly. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and the tapping grew louder, closer. My phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor, and the light flickered out completely. In the pitch black, I felt something cold brush against my arm. I read it. I didn't think. I just bolted for the door, yanking it open and sprinting down the hallway. I didn't stop until I was back in the elevator, pounding the button for the lobby. The doors finally closed, and as the elevator descended, I felt a cold dread wash over me. In the reflection of the mirrored walls, I saw it, the blank face, staring over my shoulder. When the elevator reached the lobby, the reflection was gone, but the feeling of being watched hasn't left me since. I quit my job a week later and moved to a different city, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear that tapping. Life after quitting the job was quieter, at least at first. I moved to a smaller city, took a remote position, and avoided tall office buildings altogether. I figured distance was the best cure for whatever had happened back on the 7th floor. For months, I didn't hear the tapping or see any sign of that blank-faced figure. Slowly, I started to believe it was over. Then, one night, I woke to a sound. At first, I thought it was rain against my window. It had that irregular irregular rhythm, soft and persistent. But as my groggy brain adjusted, I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside my bedroom. Tap, tap, tap. My blood ran cold. The sound was coming from my closet. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and stared at the closed closet door. The tapping stopped. For a few moments, the silence was deafening, and I thought maybe I'd imagined it. But then, the handle jiggled ever so slightly. I grabbed my phone, fumbling with trembling hands to turn on the flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the dark room, landing on the closet door just as it creaked open an inch. Nothing came out, but the sliver of darkness inside seemed to pulse as if it were alive. I didn't stay to find out. I bolted out of my apartment and into my car, leaving everything behind. I spent the night in a motel, too scared to sleep. The next morning, I returned to the apartment with a friend. Together, we searched every inch of the place, but the closet was empty. No sign of anyone or anything was inside. I moved again a week later, this time to a small house in a quiet neighborhood. I kept telling myself it was just paranoia, that I'd let my imagination get the better of me. But deep down, I knew better. I didn't feel safe anymore, no matter where I went. It's been nearly a year since I left that building, but I know it's not over. Every now and then, I hear tapping on a window, on the walls, even on the floor beneath my bed. It's always faint, always irregular, but unmistakable. I've done everything to convince myself it's nothing: pest control inspections, soundproofing, even therapy. But no amount of rational explanation can shake the feeling that something followed me, something that doesn't want to let me go. 2 nights ago, I found something on my phone, a video buried in a folder I don't remember creating. When I played it, my stomach turned to ice. It was footage from the night I returned to the 7th floor, shaky and dim. I must have accidentally hit record when my phone fell. The screen showed the dusty room, the flickering light, and something moving in the shadows. The figure stepped into the frame slowly, its blank face tilting as if it knew it was being watched. And then, impossibly, it turned toward the camera, toward me. Its arm reached forward, long fingers stretching until they filled the screen, and the video ended. I didn't make that recording, at least, not the part where it looks directly at me. Let's not meet. Blank-faced figure, because this time, I'm not sure I'd survive. I used to take late night walks to clear my head, especially after stressful days. There was a particular route I loved that included an overpass with a view of the highway below. The steady hum of traffic was oddly soothing. One night, I decided to head out for one of these walks around 11 p.m. It was summer, so the air was warm and heavy with the scent of blooming flowers. The overpass was about 20 minutes from my house, and the streets were eerily quiet. As I approached it, I noticed a figure standing by the railing, leaning over slightly. It wasn't uncommon to see other night owls enjoying the view, so I didn't think much of it, but as I got closer, I realized something was off. The person wasn't just leaning, they were staring down at the traffic, completely motionless. Their posture was unnaturally rigid, like a mannequin propped up for display. They were wearing a hooded sweatshirt, the hood pulled up despite the warm weather. I felt a flicker of unease but brushed it off. Maybe they were just deep in thought or having a tough time. I kept my distance, walking to the other side of the overpass. I didn't want to intrude on their space. When I was about halfway across, I noticed them turn their head slightly as if following me with their eyes. My heart rate picked up, but I told myself to stay calm. It wasn't like they were doing anything threatening yet. Then I heard it, a faint scraping sound, like metal against concrete. I turned my head just enough to see that the person was dragging something along the ground as they started walking toward me. It was long and thin, glinting faintly under the orange streetlights. My stomach dropped. It looked like a crowbar. I tried to act normal, picking up my pace slightly but not enough to make it obvious I was scared. The person matched my speed, and the scraping sound grew louder, more deliberate. By the time I reached the end of the overpass, I was practically speed walking. I glanced back once and saw the person had broken into a jog, the crowbar still in their hand. That's when my adrenaline kicked in, and I started running. I didn't stop until I reached a well-lit convenience store about 3 blocks away. I burst through the doors, gasping for breath, and the cashier looked at me with wide eyes. I told him someone was following me, and he immediately called the police. I stayed inside, peeking out the windows, but I didn't see anyone. When the police arrived, I gave them a description of the person. They promised to patrol the area but didn't seem overly concerned. I never found out if they caught the person or if they were just trying to scare me. I've stopped taking late night walks since then. In the weeks following the incident, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My once peaceful neighborhood suddenly felt suffocating, the shadows on every street corner hiding potential threats. I installed extra locks on my doors and made sure every window was secured before bed. It felt paranoid, but I couldn't help it. A couple of days after my overpass encounter, I decided to confront confided a coworker, Sam. She was the kind of person who didn't scare easily, and I figured she might have some practical advice. When I told her what had happened, her face went pale. Wait, she said slowly, was it on the overpass near Mill Street? Yeah, I replied, my heart sinking. Why? Sam hesitated, then leaned in closer. About a year ago, a girl I went to high school with had something similar happen to her. She was walking on that same overpass late at night and saw a guy just standing there. She said he started following her, but when she ran, he didn't. He just stood there, watching her until she was out of sight. I felt a chill run down my spine. Did she go to the police? She did, but nothing ever came of it. They chalked it up to a random weirdo. But here's the creepy part, Sam said, lowering her voice. A couple of months later, there were reports of missing pets in the area. Dogs, mostly, and a few cats. People swore they saw someone carrying tools around at night, but no one could ever describe him clearly. Eventually, it stopped, and everyone just forgot about it. By now, my hands were trembling. I wanted to believe it was all just a coincidence, but my gut told me otherwise. For a while, nothing else happened. I avoided the overpass entirely and tried to convince myself that I was safe. But about a month after my encounter, I found a note slipped under my front door. It was written in messy, uneven letters on a torn piece of paper. Why did you run? I just wanted to talk. I froze, the paper shaking in my hands. My mind raced, trying to figure out how they had found me. I hadn't seen anyone following me home that night, and I didn't even live that close to the overpass. I called the police again, and they took the note for evidence. But just like before, there wasn't much they could do. They promised to patrol the area more frequently and told me to call if I noticed anything suspicious. For the next few weeks, I was hyper vigilant. Every sound of the night made me jump, and I rarely left the house unless absolutely necessary. My friends offered to stay over, but I felt like I would be putting them at risk too. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of tapping. At first, I thought it was coming from the window, but as I sat up, I realized it was coming from my front door. Soft, deliberate taps, like someone was trying not to wake the neighbors. I stayed frozen in bed, barely breathing, hoping they would go away. After what felt like an eternity, the tapping stopped. I didn't dare check until morning. When I finally opened the door, there was nothing there, just an empty street and the faint sound of birds chirping. But as I looked closer, I noticed scratches near the doorknob, as if someone had been trying to pick the lock. That was the last straw. I packed my things and moved out within the week, breaking my lease and crashing on a friend's couch until I could find a new place. I didn't leave a forwarding address, and I've never been back to that neighborhood. To this day, I don't know who they were or what they wanted, but I still have nightmares about the sound of scrapey metal and soft tapping in the dark. After moving out, I tried to put the whole ordeal behind me. I told myself it was just a random creep, and I'd done the right thing by leaving. But the truth is, even in my new place, I couldn't shake the paranoia. I became obsessive about locking doors and windows, triple checking them before bed. Every unfamiliar sound sent my heart racing. For a while, things seemed to settle down. I got a new job at a busier part of town, made some new friends, and started to feel somewhat normal again. The fear faded, though never completely. I'd even convinced myself that the person from the overpass had likely moved on, or better yet, been caught doing something stupid. Then, about 6 months after I'd moved, something happened that made my blood run cold. I was cleaning out some boxes in my closet one weekend when I found a book I didn't recognize. It was an old, tattered novel with a faded cover. At first, I thought it must have been left by the previous tenant, but as I flipped through the pages, I noticed something strange. There were notes scribbled in the margins. Phrases like "she ran and why hide" popped out at me, written in the same messy, uneven handwriting as the note that had been left under my door. My stomach churned as I flipped faster, scanning for more. About halfway through, I found a page where the words had been crossed out violently with thick black marker, except for one phrase. I said "you." I dropped the book like it had burned me, my mind racing. How had it gotten into my apartment? Had it been there the whole time? Or worse, had someone put it there after I moved in? I called the police again, explaining the situation. An officer came by, took the book, and filed a report, but I could tell they didn't take it seriously. They assured me it was probably a prank or something left by a previous tenant, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. A few nights later, I was sitting on my couch, trying to distract myself with TV, when I noticed something on the floor near the front door. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but as I got closer, I realized it was another piece of paper, folded neatly and slid just under the door. I didn't want to touch it. My hands were shaking as I grabbed a pair of tongs from the kitchen and used them to pick it up. Unfolding it, I found a single line of text. "You can't move far enough." I froze, staring at the note. Whoever this was, they knew where I lived slipped again. I thought about calling the police, but I already knew what they'd say. Without proof of a direct threat or evidence of who was doing this, there was nothing they could do. That night, I barely slept. I kept every light in the apartment on and sat with my back to the wall, clutching a heavy flashlight for protection. I didn't hear anything unusual, but the silence felt oppressive, like the world outside was holding its breath. The next morning, I packed a bag and checked into a hotel. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my closest friends. I couldn't risk it. Over the next week, I arranged for a new apartment in a different city entirely, leaving no forwarding address and using a post office box for all my mail. I've been living here for almost 2 years now. No strange notes, no tapping on the door, no mysterious books. But the fear has never really gone away. I still glance over my shoulder when I'm walking alone, and I never let my guard down. I don't know who they were or why they chose me, but I know this: if they ever find me again, I'll be ready. I went to a pretty large university, and like most students, I had a membership to the campus gym. I'd always gone in the evenings because it wasn't as crowded as during the day. I liked the solitude. Fewer people meant shorter waits for equipment and, honestly, fewer distractions. One evening, I went for my usual workout around 9:30 p.m. The gym was nearly empty, save for a few dedicated athletes and the staff at the front desk. I headed to the locker room to stash my bag. When I walked in, it was silent, completely empty, or so I thought. The gym's locker room had an odd layout. It was long and narrow, with rows of lockers lining both sides. You couldn't see around the corners unless you were directly in front of them. I picked a spot about halfway down the row and started changing into my workout gear. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of metal clanging together, like someone was fiddling with a lock or a latch. It was subtle but distinct. I froze for a second, listening, but it stopped almost as quickly as it started. Assuming it was just someone further down, I shrugged it off and continued getting ready. I was lacing up my shoes when I heard it again, this time louder, almost deliberate. It wasn't coming from the lockers near me, though. It sounded like it was coming from the far corner of the room, just out of sight. "Hello?" I called out, feeling a little silly. No response. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the pipes or something mechanical in the old building. I finished up and headed to the gym floor. I had a great workout, an hour of weights, followed by some cardio. By the time I was done, it was close to 11 p.m. The gym was practically deserted, and I decided to head back to the locker room to grab my stuff. As I stepped inside, the locker room felt off. The air was colder, and the fluorescent lights overhead were flickering slightly. I chalked it up to exhaustion and walked to my locker. The place was completely silent, no more metal sounds, no footsteps, nothing. I grabbed my bag and was about to leave when I noticed something weird. The locker next to mine was wide open. I distinctly remembered it being closed when I arrived. I would have noticed because it was directly at eye level. It wasn't just open, though. The lock was hanging from the latch, and the door looked like it had been bent outward, like someone had pried it open. I stood there staring at it for a moment, trying to figure out what to do. Should I tell someone? Was someone here? That's when I heard breathing, low, shallow breathing, like someone trying not to be hurt. My heart jumped into my throat. The sound was coming from behind me. Slowly, I turned around, scanning the room. At first, I didn't see anything, just rows of lockers and shadows. Then I saw it. Someone crouched behind the last row, half hidden in the dim light. It was a man, dressed in dark clothes, his face partially obscured by a hoodie. He wasn't looking at me, though. He was looking down, fiddling with something in his hands. It was a knife. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. My mind was screaming at me to run, but I didn't want to draw his attention. Slowly, I started backing away toward the exit. My heart was pounding so loudly I was afraid he'd hear it. Just as I reached the door, the man stood up. He was tall, much taller than I expected, and his movements were deliberate, almost mechanical. He didn't say anything, but he looked directly at me, his knife glinting under the flickering light. I bolted. I didn't stop running until I was out of the gym, across campus, and safely in my dorm. I called campus security, but by the time they arrived, the man was gone. They found the locker he'd broken into and a few other signs of tampering, but nothing that pointed to who he was or why he was there. A few weeks passed, and I thought the whole thing was behind me. I hadn't told many people about it, just my roommate and a couple of close friends. Campus security didn't follow up with much information either. They said they'd review the security footage, but I never heard back. I figured it was just some random creep who'd moved on. Then, one night, something happened that made me question everything. I was walking back to my dorm after a late study session at the library. It was around midnight, and the campus was eerily quiet. The path I took was well lit but isolated, winding past some older academic buildings and the student center. I was about halfway home when I noticed something or someone behind me. At first, I thought it was another student heading in the same direction, but when I glanced back, I couldn't make out much. Whoever it was stayed just far enough away to be obscured by the shadows. They weren't walking at a normal pace either. It was more of a stop and start rhythm, like they were were deliberately keeping their distance. My stomach tightened and my heart began to race. I picked up my pace, hoping they'd lose interest or turn off onto another path, but they didn't. Every time I sped up, so did they. When I slowed down, they slowed down too. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. By the time I reached my dorm, I was practically running. I swiped my keycard and slammed the door behind me, pressing my back against it as if that would somehow keep me safe. My roommate was sitting on the couch, eating popcorn and watching a movie. She looked up, startled, and, "Whoa, you okay?" she asked. There was someone following me, I said, my voice shaking. I don't know who, but they were definitely following me. She got up and locked the door, peeking out through the peephole. "I don't see anyone," she said, trying to reassure me. Maybe it was just another student. I wanted to believe her, but something about it didn't sit right. I stayed up late that night, jumping at every little sound. Around 3 a.m., I finally dozed off. When I woke up the next morning, there was a folded piece of paper slid under our door. My blood ran cold as I picked it up. The note was short but chilling, and "You run fast. Let's see how long you can keep it up." I immediately showed the note to campus security. They seemed concerned but didn't offer much more than promises to increase patrols around the dorms. My roommate and I started double checking the locks and sticking together as much as possible. For a while, things were quiet again, but a few weeks later, I started noticing strange things, small, subtle signs that someone had been in places they shouldn't have been. My gym bag, which I kept shoved under my bed, was pulled out just slightly. A pair of shoes I never wore were moved to the middle of the room. The worst was when I found a locker key sitting on my desk one evening. It wasn't mine, and it didn't belong to anyone I knew, but I recognized it. It looked exactly like the locks we use at the gym. I don't know how he got in or how he managed to avoid being caught, but I was terrified. I stopped going out at night altogether and started carrying pepper spray everywhere I went. Eventually, the semester ended, and I moved off campus. I changed my routine, made new friends, and tried to put it all behind me. But sometimes, when I'm out late or walking alone, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him there. After moving off campus, I thought I'd finally found some peace. My new apartment was in a quiet area a few miles from school, and I made sure it had good security, keycard entry for the building, cameras in the hallways, and a solid deadbolt on my door. I didn't tell many people my new address, just my close friends and family. For a while, I let myself believe it was over, but the feeling of being watched never completely left me. Every time I went out, I couldn't shake the sense that someone was keeping tabs on me. I'd see the same cars parked near my building too often or feel eyes on me as I walked to class. My friends told me I was being paranoid, and I wanted to believe them, but deep down, I knew better. Then, one night, something happened that shattered any illusion of safety I had left. It was a Friday, and I decided to spend the evening in. My roommate from the dorms had come over for a movie night, and we were binging cheesy horror flicks in our pajamas. Around midnight, she decided to call it a night. She offered to crash on my couch, but I insisted I'd be fine and walk her to the building's front door. After she left, I locked the door behind her and double-checked my apartment locks before heading to bed. At around 3 a.m., I woke up to a strange sound, a faint scratching, like something brushing against the walls. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen, but the sound stopped. I told myself it was just the wind or something outside and tried to go back to sleep. Then it started again, louder this time. It wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from inside the apartment. I sat up, every nerve in my body on high alert. The scratching seemed to be coming from the living room. Slowly, I got out of bed, grabbed the pepper spray I kept on my nightstand, and crept toward the door. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears as I turned the knob as quietly as I could. The living room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lights outside. I scanned the room but didn't see anything out of place. Just as I started to relax, I heard it again, this time coming from the kitchen. I'd moved toward the sound, my hands trembling as I flipped on the light. My breath caught in my throat. The kitchen window was open. I knew for a fact I'd locked it earlier. The lock was still engaged, but the frame had been forced. The wood splintered where someone had pried it open. My stomach dropped as I realized the scratching sound hadn't been random, it had been someone breaking in. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator as I backed away from the window. I hadn't even finished explaining the situation when I heard it, a low, deliberate laugh coming from behind me. I spun around, pepper spray at the ready, but the room was empty, or so I thought. Then I saw it. The man from the locker room was standing in the corner of my living room, partially obscured by the shadows. He wasn't holding a knife this time, just standing there, watching me with a chilling grin on his face. My body froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. "Fast," he said, his voice low and mocking, but not fast enough. I don't know what happened next. Adrenaline must have taken over because the next thing I knew, I was out the door and running down the hallway, screaming for help. A neighbor came out of their apartment, and together we waited for the police to arrive. By the time they got there, the man was gone. They found footprints outside my kitchen window and signs of forced entry, but no other clues. I moved out the next day. I didn't care about breaking the lease or leaving half my stuff behind. I just couldn't stay there. I transferred schools the following semester and even changed my phone number and email address. To this day, I don't know who he was or why he targeted me. A few years ago, I moved into a cozy little townhouse in the heart of the city. It wasn't anything fancy, but the rent was cheap, and it was within walking distance of my job. My unit faced a narrow alley, and directly across from me was an older, run-down apartment building. Most of the windows were dark, with the exception of one on the 3rd floor. That window caught my eye the very first night. The light inside was dim and flickering, like it came from a dying bulb or an old TV. I couldn't make out much, but I could see a silhouette, a person sitting in a chair, always facing my direction. It was unnerving, but I brushed it off. Maybe it was just someone watching TV, and the angle made it look like they were staring at me. For the first few weeks, I tried to ignore it. I'd close my curtains, but curiosity always got the better of me. I'd peek out, and sure enough, the figure was still there. They never moved, never shifted, just sat there, facing my window. One night, after a particularly long day, I decided to confront my fear. I rationalized it in my head. Maybe it was a mannequin or a trick of the light. Grabbing a flashlight, I opened my window and shined the beam toward the 3rd floor window. The light hit the glass, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. It wasn't a mannequin, it was a man, gaunt and pale, with sunken eyes and an unsettling grin stretched across his face. He didn't flinch or react to the flashlight. He just stared. I slammed my window shut, my heart racing. The next morning, I called the building's management, pretending to be a concerned neighbor. I asked about the occupant of that unit, but the manager told me the apartment had been empty for months. I didn't sleep that night, or any night after that, for a while. The light in the window never went out, and the figure never moved. I started to avoid looking at it altogether. About a month later, I was woken up in the middle of the night by a loud knock on my door. When I checked the peephole, no one was there. I opened the door cautiously, and lying on my doormat was a folded piece of paper. Written on it in shaky, scrawled handwriting were 4 words: I see you too. I moved out the next day. After moving out of that townhouse, I managed to find a place further uptown. It wasn't as cheap, but it had something my old home never did: peace of mind. At least, that's what I told myself. For months, I didn't see or hear anything strange. The light in the alley, the silhouette, the note, it all felt like a bad dream that had finally ended. I started to convince myself that maybe it was a prank or some overactive imagination on my part. Life went on, but then, about 6 months later, something happened that made it all come rushing back. It was a Sunday evening, and I was unpacking a box of old books that I'd never bothered to sort through since the move. At the bottom of the box was a framed photo of me and my younger sister, taken a couple of years earlier at a family reunion. We were standing in front of a large oak tree, grinning ear to ear. What caught my attention was something I hadn't noticed before. In the background of the photo, partially obscured by the tree, was a man. He was blurry, but the sunken eyes and unsettling grin were unmistakable. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, my mind racing. How had I not seen this before? Was this some kind of sick coincidence, or had he been following me long before I'd even noticed? I showed the picture to my sister the next day. She didn't remember seeing anyone near us when the photo was taken, but as we talked, she hesitated, like she was holding something back. Finally, she said, "You know, I didn't want to scare you, but when I stayed at your old place that one weekend, I thought I saw someone outside your window. I didn't mention it because I thought it would freak you out." My stomach dropped. That was the same weekend I'd gone out of town for work. My sister had stayed there alone. After that, I became hyper aware of my surroundings. I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, locking and relocking my doors, even checking under the bed like a kid afraid of monsters. It felt like paranoia, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The final straw came a few weeks ago. I was walking home from work late one night, cutting through a park to save time, and it was quiet, with only the faint hum of distant traffic. As I passed a line of trees, I felt it, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I turned around, and there he was, the man from the window. He was standing about 30 feet away, partially hidden behind a tree. His grin was wider than I'd ever seen, and his head was tilted at an unnatural angle. I froze, unable to move or breathe. Then, he stepped out from behind the tree. He raised his hand, and I thought for a moment he might be holding a weapon. But it wasn't. It was something much worse. He was holding my photo, the same one I'd found in that box, the one with him in the background. He held it up for me to see, and then he pointed at me. I ran in. I don't know how long I sprinted before I finally reached my apartment. I locked every door and window, called the police, and waited. They came quickly, but of course, by the time they searched the area, there was no sign of him. The officers tried to reassure me, but I could tell they didn't take it seriously. immediately. They suggested it was just a random creep, but I knew better. I've since moved again, this time to a completely different city. I've changed my number, deleted all my social media, and told as few people as possible where I live. It's been a few months, and so far, I haven't seen him again, but every time I pass a window or catch my reflection in a darkened surface, I can't help but feel like he's still out there, watching. I wish I could tell you that moving to a new city ended the nightmare. For a while, I believed it had. I kept my life as low profile as possible, no social media, no predictable routines, nothing that could make me easy to track. But deep down, I knew that peace wouldn't last forever. It happened again 2 weeks ago. I'd been working late and decided to stop at a coffee shop near my new apartment to unwind before heading home. It was one of those places that stayed open late, with dim lighting and quiet music that made it feel cozy and safe. I settled into a corner booth, ordered a latte, and started flipping through a book. When I looked up from the pages, I saw him. He was outside the coffee shop, standing across the street under a street lamp. That same thin frame, sunken eyes, and unsettling grin. The moment I saw him, he raised his hand, not to wave, but to point. He pointed directly at me. My chest tightened as panic set in. I tried to act normal, not wanting to draw attention or make him realize I'd seen him. I picked up my phone and texted a friend, asking them to call me immediately. When my phone buzzed and I pretended to answer, I used the opportunity to slip out the back door of the coffee shop. I ran down the alley behind the building, weaving through side streets and alleys, trying to lose him. My heart was pounding, but I didn't stop until I was sure I hadn't been followed. When I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door, closed every curtain, and stayed up the entire night clutching a kitchen knife. The next morning, I called the police again, but the pattern was the same. They took a report, promised to look into it, and left me feeling like I was losing my mind. Then, yesterday, I found something that made my blood run cold. I came home from work to find an envelope wedged into my doorframe. My name was written on the front in that same shaky handwriting I'd seen before. I hesitated before opening it, dreading what I'd find inside. It was a photo. This time, it was a picture of me taken from outside my apartment. The angle suggested it had been snapped through my living room window. I was sitting on my couch, completely unaware that I was being watched. On the back of the photo was a single word: soon. I didn't sleep last night. Every creak of the building, every shadow in the corner of my eye felt like him. I packed a bag, left my apartment, and checked into a hotel on the other side of the city. I'm writing this from that hotel room, trying to figure out what to do next. I've been through this too many times to believe it'll stop. Moving hasn't worked. Hiding hasn't worked. He always finds me. This happened a few years ago when I was house sitting for my aunt and uncle while they went on a cruise. Their place was a nice, modern house in a quiet neighborhood, tucked away at the end of a dead-end street. The only odd thing about it was the overgrown, abandoned-looking house next door. Before they left, my aunt warned me, "You might hear strange noises from the house next door. It's been empty for years, but kids like to mess around there sometimes. Just ignore it, and they'll go away." I didn't think much of it at first. The first couple of nights were uneventful. I worked remotely during the day, spent my evenings watching movies, and went to bed early. It was peaceful. On the third night, though, I started hearing things. It began with a faint scratching noise, like someone dragging something across the pavement. I figured it was raccoons or maybe stray cats and went back to my movie. But as the night went on, the noises got louder. By midnight, I was hearing faint tapping on the windows at the side of the house. I felt a little uneasy, but I reminded myself about what my aunt had said. Probably kids being stupid. I turned on all the outdoor lights to show I was home and hoped they'd get bored and leave. The tapping stopped for a while, but then there was a loud thump at the back of the house. I froze. That wasn't a kid messing around. That was someone or something serious. Grabbing my phone, I tiptoed to the back door and flipped on the light. The yard was empty. I stared out into the shadows for a long moment, then double-checked the locks before heading to bed. I told myself I'd call the non-emergency line in the morning if anything else happened. At around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint but unmistakable, low, guttural voices coming from outside. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it sounded like they were arguing. I stayed perfectly still in bed, heart pounding, and listened. The voices got louder, and then I heard footsteps. They were moving around the side of the house, heading toward the front. Summoning my courage, I peeked out the window. I could barely see through the blinds, but I caught a glimpse of two figures standing on the lawn. One was tall and thin, and the other was shorter, hunched over like they were holding something heavy. I called the police. It felt like an eternity before the red and blue lights finally lit up the street. By the time the officers arrived, the figures were gone. I told them everything, and they searched the property but found no signs of forced entry or damage. They did, however, find a pile of broken glass near the side window, like someone had smashed a bottle there recently. The next morning, I decided to check out the house next door in daylight. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. The front door was hanging open, and the inside was a wreck, graffiti on the walls, broken furniture, and a smell like mildew and rot. I was about to leave when I noticed something strange, a stack of Polaroid photos on the floor near the fireplace. They were pictures of my aunt and uncle's house. Some were from far away, taken from the overgrown yard. Others were close-ups of windows, including the one right next to the room where I've been sleeping. I handed them over to the police, but nothing ever came of it. My aunt and uncle decided to put up a privacy fence and some security cameras, but I haven't house sat for them since. A few weeks after the incident, my aunt called me with a strange update. Hey, she said hesitantly, remember that night you called the police when you were here? Of course, I replied, what's going on? Well, the security cameras we installed, they've been picking up some weird stuff, mostly shadows and movements around the house next door. The cameras catch glimpses of people, different people, always late at night. It's like they come and go from that place. We showed some of the footage to the police, but they still can't do much because it's private property. I didn't know what to say. It sounded like the creepy house next door wasn't as abandoned as it seemed. And then she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, last night, we got footage of someone standing in our yard, right by the back door. Chills ran down my spine. What did they do? Nothing. They just stood there for over an hour. They didn't try to get in or anything. They just stared at the house. The police checked it out, but by the time they got here, the person was long gone. I didn't sleep that night, even though I was miles away from their house. A month later, my aunt and uncle decided to sell the place. They never told their real estate agent about the strange activity next door. They just wanted to get out as quickly as possible. The last time I visited their new house, my uncle shared something he hadn't told me before. You know that stack of Polaroids you found? The ones you gave to the police? Yeah. Well, after we moved out, they mailed them back to us, said it wasn't enough evidence to link to any crime. I didn't understand why they'd send them back, but he went on. When we looked at them again, we noticed something we hadn't seen before. In one of the photos at the living room window, there's a face reflected in the glass. And it's not yours, or mine, or your aunt's. I felt cold all over. What kind of face? He hesitated. It was wrong, just wrong. The proportions were off, like the eyes were too big and the smile was too wide. It looked like it was grinning. They destroyed the Polaroids after that. I couldn't blame them. To this day, I think about that house. Who were the people creeping around? What was their connection to the abandoned property? And most of all, what was the thing in the photo? A few years passed, and the eerie memories of that house faded into the background of my life. My aunt and uncle seemed happy in their new place, and I stopped bringing it up whenever we talked. I thought I had put the whole thing behind me until a few weeks ago. I was scrolling through a local community group on social media when I saw a post that stopped me cold. It was a blurry picture of the same abandoned house next to my aunt and uncle's old property. The caption read, anyone know what's going on here? People keep hearing strange noises and seeing lights at night. This house has been empty for decades, right? The comments were a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Some people claimed it was just local kids playing pranks, while others swore they'd seen weird figures around the property late at night. A few brave souls said they tried to explore the house, but they always felt watched and left before getting far. I couldn't stop myself. I sent the poster a message asking if they'd seen anything unusual themselves. They replied almost immediately, yeah, it's creepy as hell. My dog refuses to walk past that house. A few weeks ago, I was walking him late at night, and I swear I saw someone standing in the upstairs window. But when I looked again, they were gone. That familiar chill ran down my spine. I wanted to let it go, but something about the house wouldn't let me. Against my better judgment, I decided to drive by it the next day. When I pulled up to the end of the dead-end street, I barely recognized the neighborhood. My aunt and uncle's old house had been sold again, and the new owners had built a taller fence. The abandoned house next door looked even worse than I remembered. Windows boarded up, the yard overgrown with weeds, and an air of decay that seemed to cling to it like a shadow. As I sat there in my car, staring at the house, I noticed something strange. The front door was slightly open, swaying in the breeze. A faint metallic clinking noise echoed from inside, like chains rattling. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I should drive away and forget about it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching me. And then I saw it, a face in the upstairs window. It was only for a second, but it was enough. The same distorted features my uncle had described, the too wide smile and impossibly large eyes. My heart raced as I fumbled to start my car, and as I pulled away, I swore I saw movement in the doorway. That night, I had nightmares about the house. In my dreams, the face in the window wasn't just watching me, it was inside my own home, staring at me from the corner of the room. The next day, I called my aunt. I hadn't told her what I'd seen, but I needed to hear her voice to ask if she'd heard anything strange strange about the house since they'd moved away. "We don't talk about that place anymore," she said firmly. "Whatever's there, it's not our problem, and it's better that way." When I was 15, my family moved to a quiet suburb in the Midwest. Our new house was old but charming, sitting at the end of a cul-de-sac on Thornridge Lane. Across the street was a dilapidated house no one seemed to know much about. Overgrown weeds surrounded it, and the windows were always dark. My parents said it had been abandoned for years. The first time I noticed anything odd was on a chilly October evening. I was in my room doing homework when I glanced out the window and saw a flicker of light in the abandoned house. It was faint, like someone walking with a candle or a lantern. I told my parents, but they brushed it off, saying it was probably kids messing around. A week later, I was taking out the trash when I saw a figure standing in the window of the house. It was just a silhouette, but it was clear they were watching me. I froze, staring back until I blinked, and they were gone. My heart pounded as I rushed back inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard soft tapping on my bedroom window. My room was on the second floor. The sound was faint but deliberate, like fingernails on glass. I didn't dare look. I lay there, paralyzed, until the noise stopped. The next morning, I found a long scratch on the outside of the glass, as if someone had dragged something sharp across it. I tried to convince myself it was just a branch from the nearby tree, though the tree was nowhere near the window. The final straw came a month later. My parents were out for the evening, and I was home alone watching TV. I heard a noise upstairs, a soft thud, like something had fallen. I muted the TV and listened. A few seconds later, I heard it again, this time closer. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy candlestick, and crept up the stairs. The hallway was dark, and the air felt heavy. I was almost to my room when I saw the door to the attic hatch was open. We never used the attic. My heart raced as I stepped back, unsure what to do. That's when I heard a soft, raspy whisper, "Come play." I ran out of the house and didn't stop until I reached a neighbor's porch. They called my parents, who came home immediately. My dad checked the attic but found nothing unusual. I told them what I'd heard, but they chalked it up to an overactive imagination and the eerie atmosphere of the neighborhood. We moved out a year later, and I never found out who or what had been in the attic. I still have nightmares about the voice, though, and sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I swear I hear soft tapping on my window. Years later, when I was in my mid-20s, I returned to the area for work. On a whim, I decided to drive down Thornridge Lane. Curiosity got the better of me, and I wanted to see if the abandoned house was still there. To my surprise, it was gone. In its place was a neat, modern home with a well-maintained lawn and a for sale sign out front. The street looked completely different, cleaner, and more vibrant than I remembered. I parked my car at the end of the cul-de-sac and stared at the spot where the old house had once stood. I was about to drive away when an older woman walking her dog stopped by my car. Looking at the house, "Oh," she asked with a knowing smile. "Yeah," I replied. "I used to live on the street when I was a kid. That house used to be, well, different." Her expression changed. "You lived here when the Thornridge house was still standing?" I nodded. "Yeah, it always creeped me out. Honestly, do you know what happened to it?" She hesitated before speaking. "They tore it down about 5 years ago. Good riddance. That place had a reputation." "A reputation," I echoed, my stomach tightening. She glanced around as if making sure no one else was listening. "There were rumors, stories about strange things happening, people disappearing. Police investigated a few times, but they never found anything concrete. Then one day, the family who owned it just vanished, left everything behind. No one bought it after that. It just sat empty, rotting away." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Did you ever hear anything about someone living there while it was abandoned? Or, I don't know, weird noises?" The woman studied me for a moment before lowering her voice. "Some kids used to break in on dares. A few said they saw a man living in the attic, though no one ever proved it. Others claimed there were things, shadows that moved on their own. One boy swore he heard a voice whisper his name when he was alone in there." I thanked her and drove off, unsettled but trying to push it out of my mind. That night, back in my hotel room, I couldn't stop thinking about the attic door and the whisper I'd heard all those years ago. Before I fell asleep, I pulled out my laptop and searched for any news about the old Thornridge house. Buried in local archives, I found a few mentions of the place, complaints from neighbors about strange lights, reports of trespassing, and one article about a missing girl who was last seen near the property in the 1970s. But one detail made my blood run cold. In a grainy black and white photo of the house, I could just make out something in the attic window, a figure, blurry but unmistakable, watching the photographer. I closed my laptop, my hands shaking. It was the same window where I'd seen the silhouette all those years ago. Whatever had been in that house hadn't left willingly, it had been forced out. I've never gone back to Thornridge Lane since, and sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I can still hear that raspy voice in my ear, whispering, "Come play." After returning home from that unsettling trip, I did my best to move on, but the experience lingered. The whispers, the tapping, the attic door, I couldn't shake the memories. Worse, I started noticing small, inexplicable things in my own apartment. At first, it was minor, misplaced keys, doors left slightly ajar when I was sure I'd closed them. Then, it escalated. I'd wake up to faint scratching sounds at my bedroom door. Once, I found my living room window unlocked, though I hadn't opened it in weeks. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m., my heart racing for no reason. The room was silent except for the soft hum of my fan. I tried to convince myself it was just a bad dream. That's when I noticed it, a shadow standing at the foot of my bed. I froze, barely able to breathe. The figure was tall and hunched, its outline barely visible in the dim light. My mind raced. Was it a burglar? A hallucination? Before I could decide, it moved closer, slow and deliberate. Then I heard it. "Come play." The same raspy whisper, as if spoken directly into my ear. My fight or flight instinct kicked in, and I bolted from the bed, flipping on the light switch as I ran. The room was empty, the shadow gone. My bedroom door was still closed and locked. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I called a friend who was into the paranormal. I wasn't sure I believed in that sort of thing, but I was desperate for answers. When I described what had been happening, her face grew serious. "It sounds like you might have brought something back with you," she said. "Spirits or entities can attach themselves to people, especially if you've had a traumatic experience connected to them. What do I do?" I asked, my voice shaking. She suggested cleansing my apartment, burning sage, sprinkling salt at the doorways, and reciting a protective prayer. I felt ridiculous, but I followed her advice to the letter. For a while, it seemed to work. The noises stopped, and I felt a sense of relief. But 2 weeks later, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of tapping on my window. I live on the 10th floor. I didn't look. I couldn't. I pulled the covers over my head and prayed until the tapping stopped. The next morning, I found a long scratch on the outside of the glass, just like the one on my childhood bedroom window. That's when I knew it wasn't bound to the house on Thornridge Lane. It was bound to me. I've moved twice since then, each time hoping to leave whatever this is behind. But no matter where I go, it always finds me. The whispers, the tapping, the scratches, they become a part of my life. I don't know what it wants or why it chose me, but I do know one thing: I'll never go back to Thornridge Lane. And if you ever come across a house that seems off, that feels wrong in ways you can't explain, do yourself a favor. Stay away. This happened a few years ago when I was fresh out of college and had just moved into my first apartment. It was a cozy little one-bedroom in an old brick building on the edge of the city. The rent was cheap, the neighborhood quiet, and I thought I had lucked out. Little did I know, I was about to have the most terrifying experience of my life. The building was quaint, but it had its quirks. One of them was the old-fashioned radiator system that clanked and hissed in the dead of night. I quickly got used to the noise, chalking it up to the building's age. What I didn't know was that there was something far more sinister to get used to. One night, I was working late, finishing up some freelance graphic design work at my desk in the corner of the living room. The only light came from my laptop and a small desk lamp, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, but the steady hum of the radiator kept me company. I was so engrossed in my work that I didn't notice the faint sound at first. It was like a soft tapping, barely audible over the wind. I paused, listening intently, and the sound stopped. Shrugging it off as a branch hitting the window, I went back to work. About an hour later, the tapping returned, louder this time. It wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from inside the apartment. My heart started racing as I stood up and turned on the main light. I walked through the apartment, checking every corner, every closet, every possible hiding spot. Nothing. The doors were locked, the windows shut tight. I told myself it must be the pipes or some other benign noise and tried to calm down. That's when I saw it. My apartment had an old hatch in the ceiling of the hallway that led to the attic crawl space. It was slightly ajar, just enough for a thin sliver of darkness to peer through. I had never noticed it before, assuming it was sealed shut. The tapping sound came again, louder now, unmistakably coming from the attic. I froze, panic setting in. My phone was on the desk, too far to grab without making noise. I didn't want whomever, or whatever, was up there to know I was aware of them. Slowly, I backed into my bedroom, shut the door, and locked it. I grabbed my phone and called the police, whispering the situation to the dispatcher. The wait for the police felt like an eternity. I could hear faint shuffling sounds above me, like someone crawling on their hands and knees. At one one point, I swear I heard breathing, low, shallow, and deliberate. When the officers arrived, I practically threw myself out the door to greet them. They searched the apartment thoroughly, then climbed into the attic. What they found still haunts me. There was a small nest of blankets, empty food wrappers, and a notebook filled with scribbled writing. Most of it was nonsense, random words and drawings, but some of the pages had my name on them. My name, written over and over, surrounded by phrases like watching her and she doesn't know. The officers told me that it appeared someone had been living in the attic for weeks, possibly months. They had been watching me through the gaps in the hatch, creeping down when I was out or asleep to steal food. Months passed after I moved out of that apartment. I settled into a new place, a modern building with secure locks, surveillance cameras, and absolutely no crawl spaces. I was doing everything I could to feel safe again, but the fear never really left me. I developed a habit of compulsively checking my windows and doors, sometimes waking up in the middle of the night to triple check the locks. Therapy helped a little, but the paranoia lingered. One night, I was scrolling through social media in bed when a notification popped up from an unfamiliar app I didn't remember downloading. It was called NeighborNet, and the notification read, "Someone in your area wants to connect." Curious but cautious, I opened the app. It seemed to be a local networking platform, like a neighborhood bulletin board. The message was from a user with no profile picture or name, just the username Watcher87. The message read, "Miss your old place." My blood ran cold. I immediately deleted the app, assuming it was some kind of sick prank, but the damage was done. That message burrowed into my mind, reopening the wounds of that terrifying experience. The next day, I visited the police station to report the message, but without any concrete evidence of who sent it, there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to stay vigilant, which didn't do much to ease my anxiety. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. I'd come home to find things slightly out of place, nothing major, just little details. A chair pulled out, a cabinet door left open, a window unlocked when I was sure I had secured it. It was subtle enough that I started questioning my sanity. Was I imagining it, or had someone found me again? Then came the package. One evening, a small, unmarked box was left at my door. It had no return address, just my name written on the front in shaky handwriting. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a single item, the notebook the police had found in the attic of my old apartment, the same one filled with my name and chilling phrases. I called the police immediately, but they couldn't find any fingerprints or clues on the box. The only thing they could do was increase patrols in my area. That night, I barely slept. I barricaded the door to my bedroom, clutching a heavy flashlight in case someone tried to break in. Around 3 a.m., I heard the tapping. This time, it wasn't coming from above. It was coming from the window in my living room. Heart pounding, I crept to the door and peeked into the living room. There, standing outside the window, was a figure. They were dressed in dark clothes, their face obscured by a hoodie, but I knew it was them. The Watcher. They pressed something against the glass, a piece of paper, and then vanished into the night. I didn't move until the sun came up. When I finally worked up the courage to look at the paper, it was another note. It simply said, "Still watching. Even after moving to a new city, the anxiety never fully left me. I tried to start over, building a life where no one knew my past. New job, new friends, new routines. It helped, but there was always a part of me that stayed on edge. For a while, things were quiet. Months passed without incident, and I began to convince myself that maybe I was finally free. Maybe the Watcher had given up, or maybe they were caught doing something else. I'd even let myself laugh at the thought that I might be overreacting. But then, one evening, it happened again. I was walking home from work, cutting through a quiet parking in my apartment. It was just starting to get dark, the shadows of the trees stretching long across the path. I was lost in thought, enjoying the crisp autumn air, when I noticed a figure on the bench ahead. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It was a public park, after all, but as I got closer, I realized they weren't sitting like a normal person. They were completely still, their head tilted slightly downward, as if they were waiting for me. I tried to keep my cool, avoiding eye contact as I walked past, but as I did, I caught a glimpse of something that made my stomach drop. In their lap was a notebook, and the way it was open, it was like they were reading something, writing something. I walked faster, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't look back, even when I felt like their eyes were boring into the back of my head. By the time I reached my apartment, I was practically running. I locked the door, checked every window, and double-checked the deadbolts. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise outside felt like a threat. Every shadow seemed to move. I told myself it was paranoia, that there was no way they had found me again. But the next morning, my doubts were erased. Sitting on my kitchen counter was a single sheet of paper. It hadn't been there the night before. My locks were intact, my windows still sealed, but the paper was there, and it wasn't mine. Scrawled in that same shaky handwriting were the words, "Nice park, nice life, see you soon." I didn't know how they got in, how they even knew where I lived, but one thing was clear, they weren't going to stop. I packed a bag and left that day, moving into a hotel while I figured out my next steps. This time, I didn't even tell my closest friends where I was going. I hired a private investigator to look into the situation, desperate for answers. Weeks turned into months as they searched for any trace of the Watcher. They checked my old apartments, followed leads, and even reviewed the surveillance footage from my new building. Nothing. It was as if the Watcher didn't exist. The investigator's final report came with a chilling conclusion. Whoever this was, they were careful. Too careful. They knew how to avoid being seen, how to stay one step ahead. They weren't just stalking me, they were playing a game, and they were winning. It's been a year since I received that last note. I've changed my name, my appearance, and my habits. I live off the grid as much as I can. No social media, no permanent address, no predictable routines. But every now and then, I catch a glimpse of something or someone that sends a shiver down my spine. I'm an experienced hiker and always take the necessary precautions, let someone know my route, pack extra supplies, and stick to trails. This time, I chose a path that wound through dense forest before opening up onto a stunning ridge overlooking a valley. I started early, wanting to reach the ridge by late afternoon for the best views. The first part of the hike was uneventful. I saw a few other hikers on the trail, but no one going my way. The forest was quiet, just the sound of my boots on the dirt path and the occasional rustle of wildlife. As I got closer to the ridge, the trail became steeper and narrower. The trees thinned out, and I began to feel the sun on my back. That's when I noticed something strange. Far ahead on the trail, I saw a figure. They were standing perfectly still, facing away from me, right at the edge of the ridge. I stopped in my tracks, unsure if I should call out. It's not unusual to run into other hikers, but this person's posture felt odd. They were just standing there, stiff as a statue, looking out over the valley. I decided to keep walking, albeit cautiously. As I got closer, I noticed they were wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up, despite the warm weather. They didn't seem to have any hiking gear, no backpack, water bottle, nothing. Hey there, I called out as I approached, trying to sound friendly. They didn't respond or even acknowledge me. My stomach tightened, but I told myself they were probably just lost in thought. I gave them a wide berth as I passed, glancing at their face, or what I could see of it. The hood shadowed most of their features, but their jaw was set and their lips were pressed into a thin line. They didn't look at me. I reached the ridge and took a few photos of the view, though I couldn't fully relax. The person was still standing in the same spot, unmoving, about 20 feet away. It felt like they were watching me without actually looking at me, if that makes sense. The uneasy feeling in my gut intensified, so I decided to head back earlier than planned. I started down the trail, glancing over my shoulder occasionally. The person was still there, motionless. After about 10 minutes of brisk walking, I stopped to take a drink from my water bottle. That's when I heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the ridge. My heart sank. I turned around and saw the same figure, now walking down the trail toward me. Their movements were steady, unhurried, like they knew exactly where I was going and weren't in a rush to catch up. Panic set in. I picked up my pace, practically jogging now, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. The trail wound through the forest again, and I hoped the trees would obscure me, but every so often, I'd hear the footsteps, closer than before. Finally, I saw another hiker coming up the trail toward me, a middle-aged man with trekking poles. I must have looked terrified because he immediately asked if I was okay. I told him someone was following me, and he offered to walk with me back to the trailhead. We didn't see the figure again, but the feeling of being watched lingered long after I got back to my car. I reported the encounter to a park ranger, but they didn't seem overly concerned, saying it was probably another hiker who meant no harm. After that encounter, I swore off solo hiking for a while. The experience stayed with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. Every time I thought about it, I could still hear the slow, deliberate footsteps and feel the oppressive sensation of being watched. About 6 months later, I joined a local hiking group. It was comforting to have company on the trails, and for a time, I managed to push the memory of that day aside. I chalked it up to my imagination, or perhaps an awkward, antisocial hiker who didn't know how to act around others. That was until a group hiked to a different part of the same park. This trail was more popular, with plenty of hikers and families enjoying the mild weather. About halfway through, the path narrowed, leading us through a stretch of forest before opening onto another scenic ridge. We stopped for a break at the ridge, taking photos and chatting. I wandered a little further down the trail to get a better angle of the valley. That's when I saw it again, the figure. This time, it was partially obscured by trees, standing at the edge of a clearing. Same dark hoodie, same unnervingly stiff posture. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to believe it was just another hiker, but the way they stood, completely motionless, felt too familiar, too raw and excited. I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. The rest of my group was still behind me, out of sight but not too far. I could have run back, but something kept me rooted to the spot. I wanted to know if it was the same person, or at least convince myself it wasn't. Against my better judgment, I took a few steps closer. Are you okay? say, "Do you need help?" Still no response, but this time they turned their head ever so slightly, just enough for me to see part of their face. Pale skin, sunken eyes, and lips that curved into a subtle, unsettling grin. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't a look of friendliness, it was a look of recognition. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. The figure didn't move, didn't follow, but the grin remained, like they were daring me to come closer. I bolted back to my group, nearly tripping over my own feet. I told them what I saw, but no one else had noticed anything unusual. A few suggested it was probably a park ranger or another hiker, but I knew better. That face, that grin, I'd seen it before. We finished the hike quickly, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched the entire way back. When we reached the trailhead, I scanned the parking lot for anything suspicious but saw nothing. Still, the sense of unease stayed with me. Months passed, but the memories of those encounters never really faded. I started to dream about the figure, always standing still, always watching, always just out of reach. Sometimes, in my dreams, they would move closer, but never quickly and never fully into view. I'd wake up drenched in sweat. The grin from that second meeting seared into my mind. My friends told me I was overthinking it, and maybe I was. But I couldn't shake the paranoia that it wasn't over. One day, a friend invited me to a local hiking seminar held at a community center. It was hosted by a ranger from the same national park and focused on backcountry safety. I figured it might be a good way to regain some confidence. Plus, I hoped hearing from the rangers would help rationalize what had happened on the trail. Maybe there was a logical explanation I hadn't considered. The seminar was uneventful at first. The rangers spoke about wildlife encounters, navigation tips, and what to do in emergencies. But near the end, they touched on trail etiquette and strange encounters. The ranger recounted a few anecdotes about odd or unnerving situations hikers have reported over the years, strange noises, shadowy figures, even rumors of ghostly sightings. Then, as if on cue, another attendee raised their hand. "Have you heard about the figure in the hoodie?" My stomach dropped. The ranger hesitated, glancing at the rest of the room before responding. "I assume you're talking about the rumors we hear every so often. A few hikers have mentioned seeing someone or something that fits that description. Usually, they're described as standing still, watching from a distance." But he trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Then what?" Another attendee pressed. The ranger sighed. "We've never found any evidence of this person. No tracks, no belongings, no signs anyone was even there. And in most cases, they're reported in areas where it would be difficult to just disappear without leaving a trace." The room fell silent. I felt a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. Someone else asked if the park had ever investigated. The ranger explained that, while they took all reports seriously, there wasn't much they could do without solid evidence. "The wilderness is vast," he said. "It's not uncommon for people to feel uneasy out there. Your mic can play tricks on you." I wanted to speak up, to share my story, but I stayed silent. What if no one believed me? Worse, what if someone in the room did? The seminar ended shortly after, and I lingered near the exit, waiting for the crowd to thin out. The ranger was packing up his materials when I finally approached him. "That figure people have seen, do you think it's real?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He paused, then gave me a small, tired smile. "Between you and me, I've worked here a long time. I don't believe in ghosts, but I've seen some things I can't explain. Just be careful out there." That night, I dreamed of the figure again, but this time, it wasn't just standing still. It was walking toward me, slowly but surely. I tried to run, but my legs felt like lead, and the grin grew wider as it got closer. I woke up gasping for air, the sensation of being watched lingering in the dark corners of my bedroom. I haven't been hiking since. I'm not sure I ever will again. I live in a big city and work long hours, often leaving the office well after dark. My office is in a high-rise building, and on this particular night, I was one of the last to leave. It was almost 11 p.m., and the building was eerily quiet. Most floors were dark except for the faint glow of emergency exit signs. I pressed the elevator button and waited. The mirrored walls around the elevator bay reflected my tired, disheveled self. When the elevator finally arrived, the doors opened to reveal an empty car. I stepped in, pressed the ground floor button, and leaned back against the wall, letting out a sigh of relief that the day was over. The elevator began its smooth descent. It passed the 20th floor, then the 19th. As it reached the 18th floor, it jolted slightly and the doors slid open. There was no one there. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe someone had pressed the button and then decided to take the stairs. I reached over to press closed door, but as I did, I noticed something odd. A single black loafer, scuffed and worn, was lying on its side in the hallway just outside the elevator. He wasn't there when I got in, and the hallway was dead silent. Uneasy, I jabbed the close door button again, harder this time. The doors began to shut but paused as if something was blocking them. I stared at the floor seam, expecting to see a shoe or bag wedged in the gap. There was nothing there. Suddenly, the elevator lights flickered. My stomach dropped. When the doors finally shut and the car began moving again, it felt slower, almost as if the elevator was dragging its way downward. The mirrored walls didn't help my growing paranoia. I kept feeling like there was something in the car with me, just out of view. I turned around to face the back mirror, looking for, I don't know, something, but it was just me and my reflection. Then, at the 10th floor, the elevator stopped again. The doors opened with a soft ding. This time, the hallway lights were dimmer, almost flickering, and standing there, just beyond the threshold, was a man. He was wearing a suit that looked a size too big. His head tilted slightly as if he were trying to see something behind me. His face was pale, his eyes dark and unblinking. "Floyd down?" he asked, his voice low and hoarse. Before I could respond, he stepped forward, but instead of entering the elevator, he stopped just inside the doors. His face now inches from mine. His eyes never left mine, and his lips stretched into a slow, unnatural smile. I backed into the corner, my hands scrambling for the door close button. The door stuttered shut, and the man didn't move. He just stood there, watching me, even as the doors closed completely. I was shaking, my breath quick and shallow. The elevator moved again, and I prayed I'd reach the ground floor without stopping. The lights flickered more now, casting weird, jerky shadows around the small space. Every sound felt amplified, the creak of the cables, the hum of the motor, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Finally, the elevator reached the lobby. When the doors opened, I bolted out, not even looking back. I ran straight to the security desk, but it was empty. The entire lobby was empty. I didn't wait around to find out more. I called a rideshare and stood outside in the freezing air, under the glow of a street lamp, until it arrived. The next day, I asked the building manager if they'd had issues with the elevator or power outages the previous night. He looked confused and said no. I also described the man I'd seen, but no one matching that description worked in the building or had been seen on security footage. The story didn't end there. I wish it had. A week after the elevator incident, I was still shaken. I kept convincing myself that it was just a prank, or maybe I was overly tired and imagined things. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I started taking precautions. I told a few close friends about what happened, though I left out some of the creepier details. I didn't want them to think I was losing it. One of them suggested I report it to building security again, just in case. So I did. They were polite, but I could tell they thought I was overreacting. A few nights later, I had to stay late at work again. I promised myself I'd leave earlier, but as deadlines tend to go, I lost track of time. By the time I packed up and headed for the stairs, it was almost midnight. The stairwell was silent, except for the sound of my footsteps echoing. I'd made it down about 5 floors when I started to hear something faint, like shuffling. At first, I thought it was just the sound of my steps bouncing back at me, but then it grew louder and more distinct. Someone else was in the stairwell. I stopped and listened, my heart racing. The shuffling sound stopped too, like whoever it was had noticed me. Hello, I called out, my voice trembling slightly. There was no answer, just the heavy, suffocating silence of the empty stairwell. I forced myself to keep moving, faster this time. I glanced over my shoulder every few steps, but I didn't see anyone. Yet, the shuffling started again, closer now, almost rhythmic, like someone dragging their feet deliberately. I turned a corner onto another landing and froze. Lying on the floor was another black loafer, the same kind I'd seen outside the elevator. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to move past it, but going back up wasn't an option either. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed a friend, someone I knew would answer no matter the time. Hello, she said, groggy but concerned. I whispered, stay on the line. I think someone's following me. She immediately perked up, asking where I was and if she should call the police. I told her I was in the stairwell and needed to get to the lobby. Run, she said firmly. I did. I took the steps 2 at a time, the sound of my footsteps drowned out by the blood pounding in my ears. Behind me, the shuffling grew louder, faster, more erratic, like whoever or whatever was chasing me had started running too. I didn't dare look back. I burst through the door into the lobby, expecting relief, but instead, I was greeted by the same eerie emptiness. The security desk was abandoned again, the lights dimmer than usual. My friend was still on the phone, yelling for me to get outside. I sprinted across the marble floor toward the exit. As I reached the glass doors, I glanced at my reflection in the glass and froze. In the reflection, standing just behind me, was the man in the oversized suit. He wasn't smiling this time. His face was blank, almost hollow, and his eyes looked wrong, like they didn't belong on a human face. I whipped around, but there was no one there. I didn't stop to think. I ran outside and kept running until I was several blocks away, where I finally stopped to catch my breath under the harsh glow of a streetlight. My friend was still on the phone, panicked and begging me to explain what was happening. I never went back to that office building. I quit my job the next day, explaining it away as burnout. I never told anyone else what I saw in the glass or heard in the stairwell. well. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone and everything is quiet, I hear it again, that faint, rhythmic shuffling. You think quitting the job would have been the end of it, that moving on would have been enough to leave whatever it was behind. But I was wrong. The first time I noticed something, I was walking home late from a friend's apartment. I'd stayed longer than I intended, trying to shake off the lingering fear that had followed me since that night in the office building. It was raining lightly, and the streets were mostly empty. I had just turned the corner onto my block when I saw it, a single black loafer. It was lying on the sidewalk near a street lamp, glistening with rain. My stomach churned, and I froze mid-step. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing did. The street was silent except for the rain tapping against the pavement. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Lots of people lose shoes, right? Maybe someone kicked it off in a drunken stumble home. I forced myself to keep walking, avoiding the loafer like it was toxic. When I reached my apartment, I locked the door and double-checked every window. That night, I dreamed of the man in the oversized suit. In the dream, I was back in the elevator. The walls were mirrored as always, but my reflection wasn't mine. It was him. He was grinning again, that slow, unnatural smile that made my skin crawl. I tried to look away, but no matter where I turned, his face was there, staring back at me. I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. My apartment felt colder than usual, like someone had left a window open, but everything was locked tight. Over the next few weeks, the signs became harder to ignore. I'd see black loafers in random places, a single shoe sitting in an alley, on a park bench, or at the edge of a crosswalk. Once, I found one on the welcome mat outside my apartment door. I wanted to believe it was some kind of cruel prank, but no one I knew would do something like this. Then there were the noises. It started faintly, like shuffling footsteps outside my door late at night. I checked the peephole, but no one was ever there. Sometimes, I'd hear inside my apartment, soft, deliberate steps on the hardwood floor when I was lying in bed. I'd bolt upright, car hammering, but the sounds would stop as soon as I turned on the lights. I started sleepy with a knife under my pillow. The final straw came about a month after I'd quit my job. I was leaving my apartment one morning, trying to shake off another sleepless night, when I noticed something taped to my door. It was an old photograph, the kind you'd see from the 70 seconds, faded and yellowed around the edges. The photo was of a man in a suit. It wasn't oversized this time. It fit him perfectly. His face, though, was the same pale, hollow expression I'd seen in the elevator. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes seemed to peer straight through the photo. Scrawled in shaky handwriting across the bottom were the words, "You're next." I moved out that same day. I didn't pack much, just grabbed what I could carry and left. I stayed with a friend for a while, then couch hopped until I found a new place. I changed my phone number, cut ties with almost everyone who knew my address, and even started going by a nickname. It's been 6 months now, and I haven't seen a black loafer or heard shuffling footsteps since. I want to believe it's over, that whatever haunted me has moved on. But sometimes, when I'm walking home late at night, I catch the faintest glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a figure standing still in the distance, watching me. This happened about 2 years ago when I was living in a small city with an old, nearly abandoned subway system. Most people didn't use it anymore unless they absolutely had to. It was poorly lit, smelled like mildew, and was generally the kind of place where you kept your head down and your wits about you. One night, I had to work late, and by the time I got to the station, it was almost midnight. The platform was empty except for a few flickering lights and the faint sound of water dripping somewhere in the distance. I stood near the edge, trying not to think about how eerie the place felt. The train finally arrived, the screech of the brakes echoing through the tunnel. When the doors slid open, I hesitated. The car was empty, save for a man sitting at the far end. He was wearing a long, tattered coat and a hat pulled low over his face. Something about him felt off, but I told myself I was being paranoid. It was late, and weird people use the subway all the time, and I got on and sat a few rows away from him, trying to focus on my phone. As the train started moving, I noticed him staring at me. Not glancing, staring. His head was tilted slightly, like he was trying to figure something out. I decided to ignore him. Then he did something strange. He stood up and moved to a seat closer to me. There were plenty of empty seats, but he chose one that was uncomfortably close. I felt a chill run down my spine. I told myself it was just a coincidence, but my gut was screaming at me to stay alert. The train rattled through the tunnels, and I realized I didn't hear his footsteps when he moved. The car was silent except for the clatter of the wheels. I risked a glance in his direction, and that's when I noticed something truly horrifying. His face was wrong. It was too pale, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years, and his eyes, God, his eyes were too large, with dark rings around them. They didn't seem human. His mouth was slightly open, and his lips didn't move, but I swear I heard a whisper, a single word, stay. I shot to my feet and moved toward the door, gripping the pole so tightly my knuckles turned white. The train was approaching the next station, and I told myself I'd get off no matter what. As the train slowed, I glanced back. He was standing now, his head tilted even more, and he was grinning, but the grin was too wide, stretching unnaturally across his face. The doors opened, and I bolted out of the car, running up the stairs 2 at a time. I didn't look back until I was out on the street, gasping for air under a street lamp. The station was empty, and the train had already pulled away. After that night, I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. I'd been tired, overworked, and maybe I had misinterpreted what I'd seen. But deep down, I knew something was wrong, really wrong. The nightmare started a few days later. In my dreams, I was always back on that train. The flickery lights cast strange shadows on the walls, and the man was there, sitting closer and closer each time. His grin would stretch wider, his whisper louder, stay. I woke up in cold sweats every night, the sound of that word echoing in my ears. I stopped sleeping well. I stopped going out after dark. I even stopped taking public transportation entirely, opting to walk or carpool instead. But then, something happened that made me realize it wasn't just a bad dream. One morning, I left my apartment to head to work. My building has a long hallway that leads to the front door, and as I turned the corner, I froze. There, at the far end of the hall, was a dark smudge on the wall. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a smudge, it was a handprint. A long, pale handprint, as if someone had pressed their palm against the wall and dragged it downward. The size of the handprint was rugged. The fingers were too long, the shape distorted. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to push it out of my mind. Maybe it was a maintenance worker, I told myself. Maybe someone had spilled something, and it just looked strange. But things only got worse. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more oddities. Items in my apartment were moved ever so slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me to know they weren't where I'd left them. My door would be unlocked when I was certain I'd locked it, and sometimes, late at night, I'd hear fate whispering outside my window, like someone was speaking just below the edge of hearing. One night, the whispering got louder. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it stay, clear as day, right outside my living room window. My blood ran cold. I live on the 4th floor. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the middle of my apartment with every light on, clutching a kitchen knife and praying for morning. When the sun finally rose, I packed a bag and left. I didn't even care where I was going, I just needed to get away. I stayed with a friend across town for a while, but even there, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One night, as I was drifting off to sleep on her couch, I heard the faint sound of whispering again, coming from the corner of the room. I didn't dare look, but I knew it was him or whatever it was. Even now, in this new city, far from that subway and those whispering nights, I find myself constantly looking over my shoulder. I've developed habits I never had before, triple checking my locks, keeping the blinds closed, avoiding empty places, and refusing to stay out after dark. It's not paranoia, it's survival. For a while, things were quiet. Too quiet, almost. I started to convince myself that maybe I had escaped it, that whatever that thing was, it had lost interest. But deep down, I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And, of course, it did. A few months ago, I got a package in the mail. It didn't have a return address, but the postmark was from my old city. That alone made my stomach twist. I hadn't told anyone where I was moving, not even my coworkers at my old job. My friends and family knew, but they didn't have my new address yet. I was still settling in. I stared at the package for a long time, debating whether to open it. Finally, I grabbed a pair of scissors and carefully cut it open. Inside was a single, crumpled subway ticket. It looked old, the edges worn and stained, but what sent chills down my spine was the date printed on it. It was the date of that night, the night I saw him on the train. I threw the ticket away immediately, but it didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing small things again. Scratches on the walls of my apartment that hadn't been there before, a faint smell of mildew, like the air in the subway tunnels. And then, one night, I found something on my kitchen counter that made my heart stop. It was a single, pale handprint, smeared in something dark and sticky. I don't know what it was, dirt, oily, bloody. I didn't want to find out. I cleaned it up, but the next morning, it was back in the exact same spot. I started sleepy with the lights on again, and I didn't leave my apartment after sunset. But it didn't matter. The whispering started up again, faint at first, like it It was coming from the walls themselves. Then louder, closer, stay. One night, I woke up to the sound of something scraping against my bedroom door. It was slow, deliberate, like nails dragging along the wood. I didn't move, I didn't breathe, and then I heard it again, that awful whisper coming from right outside the door. Stay. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in fear, but eventually the sound stopped. When the sun rose, I packed another bag and left. I didn't even bother locking the door behind me. I drove for hours, not caring where I ended up, until I found a small motel off the highway and checked in. I've been living out of motels and short-term rentals ever since, moving every few weeks. It doesn't feel like enough, though. The nightmares are back, and every so often, I find something that doesn't belong, an unfamiliar smudge on a wall, a faint mildew smell, or, worst of all, a whisper in the dark. I don't know what it wants or why it's following me, but I know one thing for certain, it's patient. It's waiting, and someday, no matter how far I run, it will catch up to me. This happened about 5 years ago when I was working late in a university library. I was a graduate assistant in the history department, which often meant spending long nights cataloging dusty old books and digitizing archival materials. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved the quiet and solitude. The archive room was in the basement of the humanities building, a place few people ventured. It had that eerie hum of fluorescent lights and the faint smell of mildew that seems to cling to old paper. The only other person who worked down there was a custodian named Reggie, and I rarely saw him. One evening, I was engrossed in scanning a collection of 19th century letters. The building had emptied out hours ago, and I had my headphones on, listening to a podcast. I barely noticed when the lights flickered, something they occasionally did in that old building. It was around 11 p.m. when I took off my headphones to stretch. That's when I heard it, faint footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere beyond the rows of shelves. I froze. No one else was supposed to be down here. Reggie, I called out, trying to sound casual but feeling the hair on my neck rise. No response. I waited, straining to hear. The footsteps had stopped, and shaking it off as my imagination, I returned to my work. But a few minutes later, I heard something else, a faint tapping sound. It was rhythmic, like someone drumming their fingers on a wooden surface. This time, I stood up, my heart pounding. Hello, I called out, louder this time. Is someone there? Silence. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, walking toward the sound. The rows of shelves seemed to stretch endlessly in the dim light. When I reached the end of the row, I found nothing, just old books and boxes of documents. Feeling unnerved, I decided to pack up and leave. As I turned back toward my workstation, I noticed something that stopped me cold, a single book lying in the middle of the floor. It hadn't been there earlier. The title was obscured, but it looked ancient, its leather cover cracked with age. I approached cautiously and picked it up. The title read, The Watchers Among Us. I felt a chill run down my spine. I'd never seen this book in the archive before. Deciding I'd had enough, I shoved the book onto a nearby shelf and hurried back to my desk to grab my things. As I was zipping up my bag, I heard it again, footsteps. But this time, they were faster, heavier, and coming straight toward me. I didn't wait to see who or what it was. I bolted for the exit, my bag swinging wildly behind me. As I reached the door, I glanced over my shoulder and saw a shadow, a tall, gaunt figure standing at the end of the aisle. I couldn't make out any features, but I could feel its gaze. It didn't move, didn't chase me. It just stood there. I slammed the door shut and ran up the stairs, not stopping until I was outside in the cold night air. I called campus security, who searched the archive room but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone else being down there. Even the book, The Watchers Among Us, was gone. After quitting the job, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination or maybe some weird prank. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong with that archive room, and I wanted to forget about it. Months passed, and life moved on. I landed another job in a different department at the university, one that thankfully didn't involve basements or late nights. For a while, everything felt normal again. Then one day, I received a package at my office. There was no return address, and the handwriting on the label was unfamiliar, slanted, almost jagged. Inside the package was a single item, the book The Watchers Among Us. My heart sank. This time, the book wasn't aged or cracked. It looked brand new. Its leather cover was smooth, and the pages smelled freshly printed. I flipped it open, expecting nothing but blank pages or meaningless text. But on the first page, and the same jagged handwriting as the package label, was a single message: You left something behind. My chest tightened as I flipped through the rest of the book. The pages were filled with entries, dates, times, and detailed descriptions of events. My events. The night in the archive room was there, described in chilling detail, down to my frantic sprint to the exit. But it didn't stop there. The entries continued, describing moments from my life since then, walking to work, sitting at my desk, grocery shopping. The most recent entry was dated the night before. It read, She locks the windows now. Smart, but she forgot the one in the kitchen. I dropped the book as if it burned me. My hands were trembling, my thoughts racing. I lived alone alone. I had locked the windows the night before, but I had forgotten the kitchen one. I was sure of it now. I immediately called campus security, who connected me to the local police. An officer came to my apartment to check things out. Nothing seemed out of place. There was no sign of forced entry, no footprints in the dirt outside, just the book on my desk, innocuous and closed. The officer took the book with him, promising to investigate, but I could tell he didn't believe me. Probably just a weird prank. He said, try not to worry, try not to worry. Easier said than done. That night, I stayed at a friend's place. When I finally returned home a few days later, I found something waiting for me. Not another book this time, but a photograph. It was tucked under my apartment door. The photo was of me sitting at my desk in the archive room, headphones on, completely absorbed in my work. But what made my blood run cold was the reflection in the glass cabinet behind me. The tall, gaunt figure was there, standing silently, watching me. I didn't stay in that apartment much longer. I moved across the state, changed my phone number, and even left social media. I've done everything I could to erase myself from the public eye. It's been 2 years since I left that life behind. 2 years of trying to rebuild a sense of normalcy, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. For a while, I thought I'd succeeded. The footsteps outside my window stopped. No more mysterious packages, no strange books or photographs. I even started sleepy with the lights off again. But recently, the sense of unease has returned. It started small, a feeling of being watched when I was out running errands, an occasional fleeting shadow in my peripheral vision. I brushed it off, convincing myself it was paranoia. Then, last week, I found another photograph. It was tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. At first, I thought it was just a flyer until I saw the image. It was me again, this time taken through the window of my new apartment. I was sitting on the couch, reading a book, completely unaware. My blood ran cold as I noticed the timestamp in the corner, 1:37 a.m. the night before. I had blackout curtains. Whoever took the photo was inside. I immediately called the police. They swept the apartment and found no sign of forced entry. No footprints, no fingerprints, nothing. The officers were sympathetic but clearly skeptical. Could be a prank, one of them said, echoing the words I'd heard 2 years ago. But it didn't feel like a prank. It felt personal. I decided to stay with my sister for a while. Her house is in a gated community with security cameras everywhere. It felt safer. But the first night I was there, something happened that shattered any illusion of safety. At around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was simple: you can't hide forever. Attached to the message was a live photo, a short video clip of me sleeping in my sister's guest room. The camera angle was low, as if the person had been crouching at the foot of the bed. I could see myself in real time, shifting in my sleep. Panic set in. I woke my sister, and we called the police again. They arrived quickly, but whoever had been there was long gone. The gates and cameras hadn't caught anything unusual, no signs of forced entry again. It was as if the intruder had vanished into thin air. Since that night, I've been living in a kind of limbo, constantly on edge. I sleep during the day and stay awake at night, keeping watch. I've installed cameras and alarms everywhere, but they don't help. Whoever this is, they're always a step ahead. A few days ago, I found something new on my doorstep. It wasn't a book or a photograph this time. It was a small leather-bound journal, identical to the one I found in the archive room years ago. When I opened it, the pages were blank except for the last one. In the same jagged handwriting as before, there was a single sentence: "You brought me with you." I don't know what that means, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever I encountered in that archive room, it didn't just find me. I think it's been with me all along. If you ever feel that faint prickle on the back of your neck, the sense that someone is watching you from the shadows, don't ignore it. And if you ever come across a book called The Watchers Among Us, leave it where you found it. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.